Chapter 1830. Gu Shengyin and Lucifer didn't have much of a reaction. On the other side, the teacher who was teaching the little angels basic magic was scared out of his wits. He quickly walked in front of the two blazing angels. "Greetings, Your Highness Lucifer." "Greetings." He looked at Gu Shengyin's face and froze for a moment. He suddenly realized that he didn't know this person whose appearance was comparable to His Highness Lucifer's. Lucifer opened his mouth and said, "This is Carrie, the new dean of the Angel Academy." The angel hurriedly bowed to Gu Shengyin. Although ordinary angels like them didn't have the chance to see Carrie, the name of Blazing Angel Carrie was firmly engraved in their hearts. Gu Shengyin, on the other hand, looked at the little angel beside the angel. This little guy was clearly still very young. His 4 small wings hung softly behind his back. Soft golden curly hair piled on top of his head. His clear blue eyes were staring at her without blinking. Really cute, she thought to herself, and a natural smile appeared on her face. "Little guy, what's your name?" When the little angel heard Gu Shengyin talking to him, his face immediately showed a happy expression. The white wings on his back spread open and his whole body flew up in a crooked manner. However, their shaky appearance made the teacher very worried. This batch of newborn angels hadn't even started flying lessons yet. But when the teacher saw that the two noble highnesses were looking at the little angel, he relaxed. With the two highnesses here, they wouldn't let anything happen to the little angel, right? The angel teacher's worry didn't appear. The little angel flew in a crooked manner. Although it wasn't very beautiful, he still flew to a height that was parallel to Gu Shengyin's line of sight. Then, he tentatively reached out his hand toward Gu Shengyin. He didn't know if this beautiful highness was willing to let him touch her. Gu Shengyin's response was to open her arms. The little angel's nervous expression instantly disappeared. Then, he fell from the sky. Because he was too happy, he forgot how to fly. But he didn't fall on the grass. Instead, he fell into a soft embrace. "Little guy, you have to be careful next time." The little angel raised her head and looked into the pair of silver eyes. He was stunned. What a beautiful highness. The angel teacher saw this scene and was both surprised and envious. He was envious that the little angel could actually be so close to Her Highness Blazing Angel. Lucifer was also clearly very surprised. He didn't think that Carrie would like the little angel so much. Seraphs were different from other angels, so even someone as gentle as Medellin had never hugged a little angel in public. He subconsciously wanted to stop her. He felt that this would affect Carrie's prestige in the eyes of the angels. But when he looked up and saw Gu Shengyin smile, Lucifer swallowed his words. Carrie seemed to be really happy. In the end, Lucifer just smiled and said, "Since Carrie likes little angels so much, it seems like the position of Dean of the Angel Academy suits you very well." Gu Shengyin narrowed his eyes and did not hide his fondness for the little angels. They are really cute. In the crystal sky high up in the sky. God subconsciously called Carrie, but didn't get a response. Only then did he realize that she didn't come back with him. For some reason, God felt a little uncomfortable. In the past 100,000 years, he was used to having Carrie by his side. 4 watch. 6 watch at night. See you later. Chapter 1831. The god's golden eyes pierced through the endless void and landed on the moon in the distance. He looked at Carrie, who was holding a newborn angel in her arms, and his face was filled with pure joy. She seemed to like the angel. The gods suddenly thought of 100,000 years ago, when Carrie had just been born. A tiny baby girl was born in his hands. The silver-haired, silver-eyed angel had shown a beauty that could suppress all creatures from her infancy. The god thought with an expressionless face that Carrie and Lucian were the most beautiful angels he had ever seen. Of course, they were also the most beautiful angels when they grew up. Gu Shengyin suddenly stopped in the middle of putting down the angel. She raised her head in confusion and glanced at the sky. Lucifer noticed her movement and asked, "What's wrong?" Gu Shengyin looked away and put down the baby who refused to leave her arms. She shook her head. "Nothing." Lucifer glanced in the direction she had just looked. Indeed, he didn't find anything, so he didn't care. They didn't know that this scene was clearly seen by the high and mighty God. She's actually so sharp. The god's low voice echoed in the great cathedral. God, Her Highness Carrie's power is rising very quickly, the Book of Creation on his lap said. The Book of Creation was the god's companion artifact. It was also the one that had accompanied the god for the longest time. Because Gu Shengyin had stayed in the crystal sky for 100,000 years, the Book of Creation was very familiar with this special Her Highness blazing angel. The other party's strength was rising too quickly. In terms of combat power, the current Carrie should be about the same as Lucifer. It sounded like it was very normal. But in fact, being able to be on par with Lucifer was an abnormal thing in itself. What kind of existence was Lucifer? Back then, the god had used up a quarter of his divine power to create everything in the world. Creating a single Lucifer had consumed 2/4 of his divine power. It could be said that Lucifer was a near-perfect creation that the god had used himself as a template. He had spent countless divine power and energy to create. It could even be said that Lucifer had completely surpassed the level of creation. In terms of strength alone, he was close to a demigod. In fact, in the heavens, the gods were just a form of faith. The one who truly ruled over heaven was Lucifer, the deputy ruler of heaven. After Lucifer was born, God used the last quarter of his divine power to create the other 6 seraphs. From this, it could be seen how huge the gap between the other seraphim and the seraphim was. Carrie's birth was a complete accident. Instead of saying that Carrie was a creation created by God, it would be better to say that she was a gift from the spirit of chaos to heaven. Before God created this world, the whole world was in chaos and darkness. It was God who couldn't bear the loneliness of time, so he broke the darkness of chaos and created everything in the world. After the heaven and earth were formed, the darkness of chaos began to disappear. Carrie was the last gift to God before the birth of the 7 seraphs, the establishment of the law of order in the world, and the disappearance of the chaos and darkness. Therefore, she was different from Seraph from the very beginning. She was not born from the hands of God. Chapter 1832. At that time, the gods had allowed her to live in the crystal sky for a long time because they wanted to observe her better. But after 100,000 years, the gods had confirmed it. Carrie was no different from the other seraphs. She had the same pure mind, loved the light, and had a firm faith in the gods. The gods were finally relieved and began to hand over the matters of heaven to Carrie. On this side, Gu Shengyin followed Lucifer all the way to the office area of Angel Academy. The angel in charge had already received the news and was excitedly waiting for the arrival of the new dean. These angels did not have the slightest bit of jealousy at being robbed of their power. On the contrary, they were very excited that a Seraph Highness had come to be their dean. What a great honor it was to be able to work under Her Highness Carrie. Lucifer took Gu Shengyin to familiarize herself with the environment of Angel Academy before leaving. Gu Shengyin was very grateful for this. As a seraph leader, Lucifer had to deal with many things every day. Under such circumstances, he took the time to accompany her. He was simply a good colleague in heaven. There was no night in heaven. The angels' work and rest time were strictly calculated according to the hourglass. Gu Shengyin stayed at Angel Academy for an entire day. After that, she discovered that there were actually several vice deans in Angel Academy. In addition, there were several assistant deans. It was also because of these people that Angel Academy had been able to operate normally for so many years without a dean. This also meant that Gu Shengyin's position as the dean of Angel Academy was completely in name. If nothing unexpected happened, her daily work would probably be to report to the academy and then spend the whole day reading books and enjoying the scenery in the Angel Library next to the academy. At most, there might be some big decisions or bills that she, as the dean, might need to look over and sign. Gu Shengyin breathed a long sigh of relief. She liked this job. A day passed. Gu Shengyin walked towards the teleportation array of the Luna sky, preparing to go directly from here to the crystal sky. Most of the angels in the moon sky were ordinary angels, so this place was completely different from the crystal sky where Gu Xingyin was and even the Jupiter sky where the seraphim lived. According to Gu Xingyin's description, this place was more like the human world in Gu Xingyin's previous mission. As far as the eye could see, there were rows upon rows of shops opened by the angels. The atmosphere was completely incompatible with the solemn heaven. Gu Xingyin saw a flower shop not far away. She thought of the passionate and shy angels when she first arrived on the moon today. What kind of flowers are these? Gu Xingyin asked as she pointed at a bunch of exceptionally beautiful flowers. The color of this flower was a gorgeous red. It was very big, with hundreds of layers of petals competing to bloom. Each petal was shining with a little bit of starlight. It was incomparably magnificent. Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. Because the gods liked holy and pure things, it was rare to see such a gorgeous and eye-catching flower in heaven. The owner of the flower shop was a two-winged angel. When he saw Gu Xingyin, his face turned red with excitement. "Your Highness, this is the holy flower of the elves from the mortal world, the elven flower." Elven flower? No wonder. Gu Xingyin instantly reacted. She had read in the classics that the holy flower of the elves was one of the most beautiful flowers in the world. It was also a treasure of the elves and was strictly forbidden from being picked by outsiders. Then there was a problem. Gu Xingyin stared at the shop owner. The holy flower of the elves is not allowed to be picked by outsiders. Where did you get this? Chapter 1833. High-level angels naturally had a strong level suppression for low-level angels. At this moment, Gu Xingyin just put away the smile on her face. She didn't do anything, but it was enough to make the angel pale. Facing Gu Xingyin's questioning, the angel didn't dare to hide anything. "This flower shop is Her Highness Gabriel's property. I'm just an employee, so it was Gabriel." Gabriel had a generous and forthright personality, and he had friends almost everywhere. It was said that the light elf king of the elves had a good personal relationship with her. If it was Gabriel, it was reasonable that she could get the elven flower. Her expression softened. "Don't be afraid. I don't mean to punish you." She pointed at the delicately packaged elven flower and asked, "How many crystal coins does this cost?" The angel quickly shook her head. "If you like it, Princess Gabriel, you can take it." Gu Xingyin frowned slightly. "What's the reason?" "I don't want to take advantage of this." The angel smiled and said, "You don't know. Her Highness Gabriel said a long time ago that in the places under her jurisdiction, as long as His Highness Lucifer and Princess Gabriel come to shop, it will be free. I don't dare to disobey her orders." Gu Xingyin raised her eyebrows. "What's the reason?" The angel quickly shook her head and said that she didn't know. Seeing this, Gu Xingyin didn't ask any more. She picked up the elven flower and left. He would thank Gabriel when the time came. The angel heaved a sigh of relief when he saw her figure disappear into the teleportation array. At that time, Her Highness Gabriel had said, "It's already a great honor for beauties like His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Gabriel to buy my things." However, the angel didn't dare to say this in front of Gu Xingyin. Therefore, the noble, beautiful, and generous Archangel Gabriel in heaven was actually a complete beauty lover. The moment Gu Xingyin returned to the crystal sky, God sensed it. Deity looked at Carrie out of habit. At first glance, he saw the bouquet in Gu Xingyin's hand. Because the attribute of the gods was light, the gods' favorite colors were white and gold, which were the purest colors of light in the world. He didn't like the extremely bright red color of the fairy flower. He even felt a little disgusted. But Deity didn't care about the color of the bouquet. He recognized the flower. With the Book of Creation, which could be considered a cheat, God only needed to take a look at anything and the Book of Creation would be able to display all the attributes of the item. Of course, there was one exception, and that was Carrie. The god's gaze fell on the last row of words. The holy flower of the elves is also a flower of love. An adult elf will pluck this flower and give it to the person he or she likes. If the other party accepts it, it means that the other party has accepted his or her feelings. A flame of anger rose in Deity's heart. Who gave this to carry? There was no room for selfish desires in heaven. Who was it that dared to disobey his orders so blatantly? As the center of the crystal sky, the god was in a bad mood. The Holy Spirit power of the entire crystal sky started to stir. Gu Shengyin, who had accompanied the god for 100,000 years, immediately noticed this. Who made the god unhappy? 7th update. 3rd update. See you later. Moi see the baby here. After reading the article, remember to vote for Gao Lingji. Chapter 1834. She quickly walked into the great cathedral and looked at the figure on the god's throne. God. She knelt down and asked in a low voice, "Why are you angry?" Why am I angry? God asked himself the same question. Was it because he saw the flower in Carrie's hand? Was it because someone violated the precepts of heaven? But how many of the tens of millions of angels in heaven had violated the precepts of the 7 virtues? A lot. Had he ever been angry when those angels violated the precepts? Never. Then, was it just because this angel was Carrie? God lowered his eyes and looked directly at the seraph kneeling on the ground with his light golden eyes. She was still holding the bouquet of bright elven flowers in her hand. She looked at him with the same trust and attachment as before. She was still his Carrie. She hadn't changed at all. The restless spiritual power in the great cathedral suddenly calmed down. At the same time, Gu Shengyin felt a gentle force lift her up. She stood up obediently and walked toward the figure on the god's throne. God didn't do anything, which meant that he acquiesced to her approach. Gu Shengyin walked until she was in front of the god's throne. She raised her head and looked at the figure shrouded in holy light in front of her. This holy light was very threatening to all creatures, but it didn't have any effect on Gu Shengyin. God, why are you angry? She asked the question again in a low voice. God looked at the seraph who was close to him. Her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly. Her clear silver eyes were filled with obvious worry. She was worried. In this world, there were angels who were worried about God. All angels felt that God was omnipotent. He was the most powerful and couldn't have any emotions. But this seraph was worried about him. God felt that this feeling was very strange. He didn't answer Gu Shengyin's question. Instead, he asked, "Carrie, are you worried about me?" This wasn't something difficult to admit. Gu Shengyin nodded. God's mood was brightened by her frank attitude. But he still said, "I don't need it, Carrie." Gu Shengyin's beautiful eyes curved into a smile. "I know that God is omnipotent. But, God, please allow your faithful followers to keep you in their hearts at all times." The god didn't say anything. He had to admit that Carrie's words made him feel better. Until he saw the bouquet of flowers in her hands. The deity asked, "Carrie, where did you get the fairy flower in your hand?" So God knew him? Gu Shengyin felt a little strange. She thought that the gods would not care about such trivial things. She answered honestly, "I was passing by the moon and happened to see this bouquet of elven flowers." She lowered her voice a little. Carrie thinks that this bouquet of flowers is very beautiful. She paused for a second. Then, as if she had mustered up some kind of courage, she looked directly at the god under the holy light and said, "I want to give it to God." Deity was shocked. Gu Shengyin's voice was somewhat strange, but it was concealed within the cold tone of his voice. Gu Shengyin didn't notice it. "You said, you want to give it to me?" Gu Shengyin was a little shy, but she still nodded. In her mind, deities deserved the best. But she didn't expect that after she nodded, the god sitting on the throne didn't speak for a long time. Gu Shengyin asked uneasily, "God, you don't like it?" Chapter 1835. God looked at the seraph who had accompanied him for a long time. She looked at him with attachment and trust in her eyes, but there was no lust. God instantly understood. Jiao Lian most likely had no idea what the elven flower signified. Looking at her cautious eyes, God's heart suddenly softened. He stretched out his hand and received the bouquet of beautiful elven flowers. God actually didn't like this color. But he said, "If it's beautiful, Carrie, I like it very much." He shouldn't have accepted it. God knew that what he should have done was to reject Carrie's words and tell her what the fairy flowers meant. This was the most suitable method, but Carrie would definitely be disappointed. God decided to pretend that he didn't know the use of the fairy flowers and just treated it as an ordinary gift. Gu Shengyin accompanied God for a while and left the great cathedral. Gu Shengyin put the flowers in a crystal vase not far from the God's throne. That place, before this, had always been filled with the holy light flower of heaven. After a long silence, the Book of Creation's voice sounded. God, your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia has already surpassed that of ordinary creations. The Book of Creation didn't say one more thing. God's attitude toward Carrie had even surpassed that of His Highness Lucifer. In response to the Book of Creation's words, God looked down and said, "Carrie wasn't an ordinary creation." Hearing God's answer, the Book of Creation looked at God worriedly. As God's companion artifact, it could ignore the holy light that could block anything in the world and directly see God's expression behind the holy light. But God's face was the same for thousands of years. There was only that layer of eternal indifference. The Book of Creation couldn't detect God's thoughts. It could only sigh faintly and fall back onto God's lap as if it had become an ordinary book. God looked down and closed it. He also closed his eyes and began to rest. When they had nothing to do, the God and the divine artifact would pass the time in silence. Gu Shengyin returned to her palace. She didn't notice the conflict between God and the Book of Creation at all. The days in heaven were always so beautiful and peaceful. Sometimes, Gu Shengyin felt that there was no difference between living like this for 10,000 years and 1 year. If there had to be a difference, it was because of the position of Dean of the Angel Academy. This mysterious seraph was finally recognized by more angels. Countless little angels were born from the angelic resurrection pool and sent to Angel Academy. They grew up and became subordinates of the 7 blazing angels. Some joined the Angel Corps, and some chose to become teachers of Angel Academy. When another creation celebration arrived, Her Highness Carrie's reputation in heaven was already close to that of the brilliant morning star, His Highness Lucifer. Gu Shengyin had a feeling that something big was going to happen. Her hunch was very accurate. In the second 100,000 years after her birth, during the second creation celebration, the infernal devils couldn't hold themselves back any longer. The demons attacked heaven, and they chose to attack on the day of the creation celebration. The provocation was self-evident. God was not the only one who was enraged. All of the angels had ugly expressions on their faces. Chapter 1836. All creatures in the world knew that God loved light and hated darkness. And the demons born in the darkness were the creatures that God hated the most. Hell was a place where God's radiance would never cover. However, such actions in hell were naturally not worthy of God's intervention. As the deputy of heaven and the commander-in-chief of the Angel Corps, Lucifer issued countless orders with a cold face. Gabriel led the Archangel Corps, Bariel led the Archangel Corps, and Michael led the Archangel Corps. They set off directly from the teleportation array on the moon and fought with the demons on the spot. As the commander-in-chief, Lucifer naturally had to go to the battlefield, but he usually did not take action. Instead, he stood on the side of the Angel Corps. Michael once joked that as long as His Highness Lucifer stood in the Angel Corps, the combat power of the entire Angel Corps would increase by more than 3 levels. Although it was an exaggeration, Lucifer's influence in the entire Angel Corps could be imagined. Out of curiosity, Gu Shengyin took the initiative to follow behind Lucifer. She also wanted to see what the demons who dared to challenge heaven looked like. Then, Gu Shengyin fell silent. With such trash, they actually dared to challenge heaven? Looking at the so-called Demon King, who was almost suppressed by the Angel Corps and forced to flee by Michael's sword of judgment, Gu Shengyin deeply felt that Lucifer actually sent out 3 Angel Corps. It was simply an insult to the combat power of the Angel Corps. As if sensing her thoughts, Lucifer smiled. "Do you think the other party is too weak?" Gu Shengyin nodded honestly. Lucifer's pale blue eyes looked at her gently. He shook his head and smiled. Carrie, you're wrong. Gu Shengyin was a little puzzled. What did he mean? Lucifer turned his head to look at the battlefield in the distance and said softly, "It's not that the demons are too weak, but that the angels are strong enough." His voice was not loud, but Gu Shengyin looked at Lucifer standing in front of her. He stood quietly with 6 glorious wings of holy light hanging behind him. For no reason, he gave off a feeling that made people want to worship him. Gu Shengyin felt a chill in his heart. No wonder so many angels worshipped Lucifer. His personal charm was too strong. It was said that the training program of the Angel Corps was created by Lucifer. The commandments of heaven were also revised by Lucifer. Angel Academy. Even the great cathedral where the gods lived was a blueprint designed by Lucifer. He was like an omnipotent existence. Lucifer had left his shadow in almost every corner of heaven. In the hearts of many angels, compared to the gods who were always shrouded in holy light at the creation ceremony, the noble seraphim His Highness Lucifer was more like their faith. Gu Shengyin thought to herself, fortunately, there is no selfishness or evil in the hearts of the angels. Lucifer also believes in God wholeheartedly and can be called the example of the 7 virtues. Otherwise, with heaven's current situation, who knew what would happen? She didn't know that the thing she was worried about would actually come true one day in the distant future. Your Highness Carrie, be careful. Suddenly, not far away, an angel exclaimed. Gu Shengyin felt a strong wind coming from behind. That strong wind contained an aura that Gu Shengyin hated very much. The power of darkness. Chapter 1837. A bright holy light shone from her body and blocked the attack. When she came back to her senses, Gu Shengyin saw who the attacker was. That person was wearing a black robe and had an arrogant smile on his handsome and evil face. He was looking at Gu Shengyin provocatively and shockingly. Gu Shengyin frowned. Baal? According to her understanding, this person should be one of the great demon kings of hell, Baal. Sin, greed. Gu Shengyin was standing at the headquarters of the Angel Corps. No one knew what method Baal used to sneak in here. The angels who came back to their senses prepared to attack this demon who had barged into the headquarters of the Angel Corps alone. However, they were stopped by Gu Shengyin. Don't do it. Let me do it, she said loudly. Baal smirked. I was curious. What kind of person is the seraph in heaven who has never shown her face? He looked at Gu Shengyin from head to toe and said teasingly, let's not talk about her strength for now. With this appearance, she is even more seductive than the top witches in hell. Clearly, Baal's ability to draw aggro was almost maxed out. He did not restrain his words. Almost all the angels who heard this were unable to restrain their anger. In the hearts of the angels, Her Highness the Seraph was the noblest existence in heaven. How could she be insulted by such a demon? Even Lucifer's expression turned cold. Gu Shengyin, on the other hand, seemed to be the calmest one. She was not angry at Baal's words at all. Hearing Baal's words that were almost malicious, Gu Shengyin only smiled faintly and said loudly, I will soon let you know that the identity of a seraph is not obtained by relying on one's face. As she spoke, she rose into the sky. Baal's eyes flashed with fighting spirit and he also rose into the sky. Gu Shengyin did not want the aftermath of the battle to affect the Angel Corps. On the other hand, Bar didn't want to have to pay attention to the angel's sneak attacks while he was in battle. Holy light flashed in Gu Shengyin's hand, and a pure white sword of light formed from the power of living beings appeared in her hand. Seeing her like this, Baal still had the mood to talk. Why aren't you like those angels? You don't even have wings. Before he could finish his words, he retreated quickly and narrowly dodged a sword ray from his opponent. Gu Shengyin looked at him indifferently. Instead of worrying about this, why don't you think about how to survive from my hands later? How arrogant. Bar's eyes lit up. He liked this kind of arrogant personality. Especially when the other party had a face that suited his taste. He teased, so confident. The beauty's name is Carrie, right? Why don't we make a bet? If I win, Carrie will fall into hell and become my demon queen. What do you think? Gu Xingyin curled her lips into a smile. Her answer was a sword light that could split the moon's sky. Lady Carrie's strength. Gabriel had unknowingly stopped fighting and turned to stand beside Lucifer. They looked up at the battle in the sky together. No, rather than a battle, it was a one-sided beating. Baal, who was known as the #1 demon king of hell, Baal self-proclaimed, was completely suppressed by Carrie. He could not fight back at all. Chapter 1838. Furthermore, the angels could clearly see that Carrie had not used her full strength at all. Lucifer smiled. I really didn't expect this. Even I want to spar with Carrie. Gabriel looked at the yearning expression on Lucifer's face and her heart tightened. She recalled His Highness Lucifer's terrifying strength, then looked at Her Highness Carrie's current display of strength. Gabriel felt that if the two of them really wanted to spar, they must not do it in her moon sky. The moon sky would not be able to withstand it. Gabriel and Lucifer chatted for a while and then saw that Gu Xingyin in the air seemed to be a little impatient. In fact, she was. Gu Xingyin felt that she had beaten enough people up. She shook her hand and raised it again. Bar was shocked to find that the sword light opposite him was at least a few levels stronger than the previous attack in terms of speed and power. An unprecedented sense of danger came over him and Bar quickly retreated. However, it was too late. The demons who were fighting with the angel army suddenly realized that something had fallen from the sky and smashed a deep hole in the ground. The angels and demons retreated one after another until the dust settled again. When they saw clearly what was in the deep hole, there was a sudden commotion on the demon side. Who else could it be other than their Lord Bar? He was wearing a flashy black robe, and his handsome face was covered in dust. He also had 2 horns on his head. There was a bone-deep wound that started from Bar's left shoulder and went straight down to his right waist. Judging from the depth of the wound, if Bar had retreated a little slower, he would have been cut in half by Gu Xingyin's sword. An ordinary human or demon would have died from such a wound. However, Bar was a king-level demon after all. At this moment, he could only grit his teeth and suck in cold air. In a moment of carelessness, he met Gu Xingyin's cold eyes in midair, and he couldn't help but shudder. He would never forget that intense feeling of brushing shoulders with death. Of course, he was also traumatized by Gu Xingyin, who made him feel this way. As expected, the angels of heaven, were their looks equal to their strength? Bar thought as he grimaced. Gu Xingyin landed beside Lucifer under the admiring gazes of the angels. At that time, she really wanted to give Bar another stab. Letting a tiger return to the mountain was not her style. But just as she was about to make a move, a huge binding force came from the void, restricting her movements. It was during this opening that Bar managed to escape with his life. That strange power seemed to have only been there to stop her from killing Bar. After confirming that she no longer wanted to kill him, it withdrew. What did that mean? Gu Xingyin was a little confused. Logically speaking, in this world, the only ones who could have such power to imprison him could only be the gods. But just now, Gu Xingyin was sure that God didn't do anything. What kind of existence was secretly protecting the demons? For the first time, Gu Xingyin understood why the difference between heaven and hell was so big, but the king-level demons of hell had never had an accident. Lucifer looked at her expression and suddenly asked, "Did you notice it too, Carrie?" Chapter 1839. Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat. The next moment, Lucifer's voice sounded directly in her mind, "There's no way to kill a king-level demon. You noticed it just now, right?" Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, she wasn't the only one who encountered such a situation. She heard Lucifer's telepathic communication with her and knew that he probably didn't want too many angels to know. After all, there was a powerful existence secretly protecting the demon race. If such a truth was exposed, it would be a huge blow to the angels. For the angels who received light education from a young age, the most disgusting thing in this world was the power of darkness. And demons were undoubtedly the creatures with the most concentrated power of darkness and filth. They were the complete opposite of the radiant and holy angels. They were natural opponents. Gu Xingyin quickly asked, "Your Highness Lucifer, you noticed it too, right?" Do you know what this situation is? To Gu Xingyin's surprise, Lucifer just shook his head. When I first fought with the demons, I noticed this. After that, I even asked my god personally, Lucifer said. Gu Xingyin looked at him curiously. God should know the reason. Lucifer met her gaze and just shook his head. Carrie, you can only ask my god personally for the answer to this matter. I can't say. Seeing Lucifer's determined expression, Gu Xingyin also knew that she probably couldn't get an answer from him. If the Archangel was unwilling to say, no one could do anything. Gu Xingyin secretly sighed and planned to ask her god personally after this holy war ended. This holy war ended unexpectedly quickly. The result was naturally hell's defeat. While the entire heaven was celebrating, Gu Xingyin came to the great cathedral alone. My God. She knelt down and prayed to the figure on the throne. Carrie, why did you come here at this time? The high and mighty God opened his indifferent eyes and quietly looked down at his favorite archangel. Gu Xingyin closed her eyes. She passed her question to the God in the form of prayer. The God's eyes suddenly darkened. The great cathedral was silent for a moment. Then, Gu Xingyin heard the God's low sigh. The gap between light and darkness is getting bigger and bigger. Heaven is getting stronger and stronger while hell is getting weaker and weaker. There are already fewer king-level demons than archangels. We can't lose any more. Gu Xingyin was surprised. She couldn't help but ask, so, God, at that time, it was you who stopped me? The God shook his head. It wasn't me, it was the remnant will of chaos. He didn't seem to mind complaining about his helplessness in front of his beloved blazing angel. There has always been a remnant will in the darkness of chaos. After this world was created, it was integrated into the world's laws. It's chaos and treats light and darkness equally. It has always been very dissatisfied with my preference for light. The God didn't feel uncomfortable at all when talking about this. Gu Xingyin voiced her guess, so, the entire world's will is protecting the darkness? The God nodded. You can understand it that way. Chapter 1840. Gu Xingyin had never thought that he would hear such words from the mouth of a god. The creator of this world was the God of light. Of course, he preferred light and hated darkness. And those who believed in God, whether angels, humans, or elves, they were all races that loved light. Hell, which gathered the power of darkness, had no way to compete with heaven. The darkness of this world, compared to the light, was too weak. She used to believe in God wholeheartedly and never had any other thoughts, so she never considered this problem. This was the first time Gu Xingyin faced the problem of light and darkness. But God obviously didn't want to talk to her about this. Carrie, if there's nothing else, you can leave. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but look up. She wanted to see God's expression at this moment, but the thick holy light blocked her sight. She could only get up and leave, returning to her own palace. A long time after Gu Xingyin left, the Book of Creation, which had been lying quietly on God's knee, suddenly floated up. God. The Book of Creation's voice sounded. The imbalance between light and darkness is getting worse. You should think of a solution. God closed his eyes. This obvious avoidance made the Book of Creation a bit anxious. It's true that you hate darkness, but God, you know very well that if this continues, there will be big problems, God said calmly. God coldly said, but I am a light element God spirit. I cannot protect hell. The Book of Creation was speechless. God was right. From the moment God was born from chaos and darkness and determined to be pure light, he was destined to prefer light. This was unsolvable. The Book of Creation fell silent. After a long time, God's indifferent voice sounded in the great cathedral. I will think of a solution. But before God could think of a solution, the will of chaos acted first. She found Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin had a dream. For hundreds of thousands of years, except for a few times, as a powerful seraph, Gu Xingyin had never had a dream. She dreamt that she had arrived in a strange space. It was empty and quiet. She couldn't see the end or the end. However, it made people feel very peaceful. Suddenly, a woman in black appeared in front of Gu Xingyin. What surprised her was that other than her black hair and black eyes, this woman was exactly the same as her. "Who are you?" Gu Xingyin asked. She could feel that this woman was very powerful and had no ill intentions towards her. The black-robed woman looked at her with a smile. "Who am I?" "Feel it." Gu Xingyin closed her eyes. She could feel a very intimate aura from the woman. This feeling, she suddenly opened her eyes. "You are the will of the world, or should I call you chaos darkness?" The woman was still smiling, and her voice was very gentle. "There's no difference." Gu Xingyin didn't have any ill feelings towards this world's previous incarnation. She asked, "Why did you suddenly appear in my dream?" The chaotic darkness looked at her with a mysterious smile on its face. "Let me return you the identity you should have." Gu Xingyin had a bad feeling. "What do you mean?" Chapter 1841. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. She had always known that she was different from the other seraphs. Chaotic darkness looked at her and smiled. "It seems that you also know something." Gu Xingyin didn't say anything. Chaotic darkness looked at her with a gentle gaze. "Carrie, you should be my child." Gu Xingyin looked up at her. Chaotic darkness' gaze seemed to contain countless things. She sighed. "When God created all things in the world, as chaotic darkness, my mission in this world had already ended, but when I saw God's light attribute, I had a bad feeling in my heart." Chaotic darkness didn't have any negative emotions when talking about God's gaze. She was like a mother who could tolerate everything, slowly recounting the events of the past. The God of creation shouldn't have such an obvious attribute deviation. As the only God in this world, he should have universal love, but he couldn't do it. The 7 days of creation ended. When my consciousness was about to enter the world's law, I seemed to have seen the future of this world. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but look at chaotic darkness. Chaotic darkness softly said a few words. "Light and darkness are out of balance. The world will collapse." Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. She wanted to tell herself that this was all fake, that this strange woman who looked exactly like her was lying to her. But her reason told her that chaotic darkness wasn't wrong. The light and darkness of this world was indeed out of balance. Especially, under God's intentional or unintentional connivance, this imbalance and the gap continued to widen. If this situation continued, chaotic darkness' words weren't completely alarmist. Gu Xingyin thought so in her heart, but didn't show any emotion on her face. Chaotic darkness couldn't see what she was thinking, so she could only continue. "You should know that 7 is the limit. In this heaven, there should only be 7 seraphs. You are the extra 1-inch." Gu Xingyin finally responded. "So?" Chaotic darkness said, "So, Carrie, you are not a seraph created by God, but the last gift chaotic darkness, left to this world before I merged with the world's law." Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. Her heart was in a mess. Chaos darkness stopped talking after saying that. She was not in a hurry to wait for Gu Xingyin's reply. Gu Xingyin was silent for a long time before she suddenly asked, "So what are you here for? What do you mean by returning something that belongs to me?" Chaos darkness smiled when he heard that. In her opinion, when Carrie asked this question, it meant that her heart had been shaken. She said, "Naturally, I want you to return to where you belong." She looked into the endless void space, unable to see the end. "Carrie, you know about hell, right? That's where you should be. You were born to be the king of hell, not to stay in heaven and be an awkward seraph." After she finished speaking, she looked at Gu Xingyin expectantly. Gu Xingyin's lips curled into a smile. She looked at the darkness of chaos and spoke word by word, "You're lying." Chaotic darkness was stunned. Gu Xingyin said calmly, "Maybe it's true that the light and darkness are out of balance, and maybe it's true that I'm not created by God. But chaotic darkness, was I really created by you?" Chapter 1842. She pointed at herself and said calmly, "If I was really created by you, chaotic darkness, then how do you explain my strong light attribute?" Chaotic darkness was speechless. She obviously didn't expect Carrie to be able to think so calmly after hearing such shocking news. Gu Xingyin was right. If the eighth seraph was created by chaotic darkness, then when she was just born, chaotic darkness would have given her the dark attribute for the balance of light and darkness that she spoke of. In that case, Carrie couldn't have stayed in heaven, let alone become the eighth seraph of heaven. Seeing that his lie was exposed, Chaos Darkness sighed. "You're very smart, Carrie." Gu Xingyin didn't take this compliment to heart. She opened her mouth and said, "Then, can we communicate openly now?" Chaotic Darkness put away the smile on her face and her expression became very serious. She said, "Then I'll tell you my purpose directly. Carrie, you need to fall." Gu Xingyin widened her eyes in surprise as if she had heard a very funny joke. The Chaos Darkness said to itself, "I watched the birth of this world. I can't just watch it decline and die. God rejects darkness, but I." Chaotic Darkness. A cold snort suddenly sounded in this quiet space. Gu Xingyin felt her mind shake. She saw the black-robed woman in front of her turn into pieces with the cold snort and disappear without a trace. She suddenly opened her eyes. Gu Xingyin stood up from the couch. God's voice sounded in her mind, "Carrie, come to the great cathedral." Gu Xingyin obediently changed her clothes and came to the great cathedral. God was still sitting on the throne. Almost every time Gu Xingyin came to the great cathedral, she would see such a scene. God opened his eyes and looked at the seraph standing respectfully at the bottom of the stairs. He was a bit angry, but not at Carrie, but at Chaotic Darkness. God did not expect that Chaos Darkness would target Jiao. Suddenly, Shen Tian paused. A fragmented memory appeared in his mind. It was Gu Xingyin who took the initiative to open her mind and spread out the memory in front of God. Such a frank and unreserved action warmed deity's eyes. "You don't have to mind the words of chaos and darkness," he said to Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin asked doubtfully, "But God," she wanted to say that the words of the Chaos Darkness were not all alarmist. But God interrupted her. "I'll take care of it." Gu Xingyin obediently lowered her head. "Yes, my God." God continued to say, "Don't worry. She won't have a chance to touch you again." This time, Chaos Darkness relied on the fact that it was now a part of the world's laws to take advantage of this loophole. After deity came to his senses, he would never give her another chance. After Gu Xingyin left, the Book of Creation asked worriedly, "God, have you really found a solution?" Deity replied, "No." The Book of Creation was speechless. God closed his eyes. Carrie alone is not enough to maintain the balance of light and darkness. And he wouldn't let Carrie fall. 2 more. 8 more. Chapter 1843. Just as God had said, from then on, Gu Xingyin never saw the Chaos Darkness again. Just like that, the days passed peacefully. Ordinary angels couldn't sense it, but a seraph like Gu Xingyin could. Heaven was as peaceful as before, but natural disasters started to appear frequently in the human world. Hell was also said to be restless. God summoned seraphs less and less. This was very rare. God spent most of his time alone in the Holy Church. Other than the seraphs, he almost never summoned other angels. But there was a big difference between rarely and almost never. All the creatures in heaven knew that God loved His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie the most. But Lucifer hadn't seen God in months. Carrie was in the same situation. The seraphs were worried. Although it was said that in their hearts, God was omnipotent and it was impossible for anything unexpected to happen, this situation was still very worrying. Lucifer gathered the other 7 seraphs for a short meeting. Lucifer frowned. "I'm worried," he said. He looked at Carrie. "Carrie, you're the closest to God. Have you found anything?" Gu Xingyin shook her head. Actually, the seraphs all knew that no matter if there was a problem or not, if God didn't want others to know, then no one would know anything. Gu Xingyin actually had some guesses. It probably had something to do with the balance of light and dark. She guessed correctly. Right now, in the Holy Church, the thick Holy Spirit power was growing at a terrifying speed. God was still sitting on the throne. But if someone could see through the holy light and look at him, they would see that God was clenching his hands tightly. The Book of Creation's worried voice came from within. God, are you okay? No one answered. After a long time, God's indifferent voice slowly sounded from the holy church. I'm fine. God opened his eyes. Book of Creation, is it okay? The Book of Creation suddenly flew into the air and floated in the air. At the same time, the pages of his book flipped rapidly, and one scene after another was reflected in his eyes. God looked on expressionlessly until the pages of the Book of Creation finally stopped flipping. The great cathedral fell into silence. After a long while, the Book of Creation's voice sounded again. How could this be? God used his great power and forcefully used the Book of Creation as a medium to find a way to maintain the balance between light and darkness. In a sense, they had succeeded. This was because the Book of Creation really did reveal the solution. But the way to solve it, both the gods and the Book of Creation found it hard to accept. Deity closed his eyes. Try again. The Book of Creation didn't say anything. Even a god of creation would have to expend a great deal of divine power to unleash such a heaven-defying divine ability. God obviously did not want to believe in that future, or rather, he wanted to find another way. But the result was still the same. The great cathedral fell into silence once more. God. A gentle female voice suddenly sounded in this space. Deity opened his eyes. Chaos Darkness. Chapter 1844. Chaotic darkness, or perhaps it should be called the world's law now, did not show her true form. Her voice reverberated throughout the great cathedral. I told you a long time ago that the balance of light and darkness is out of balance. There will be big problems in the world in the future. You are confident of your ability. Now, how do you feel? God said faintly, what do you mean? Chaotic darkness chuckled softly. It's very simple. I don't want to become the world's law. Now my consciousness is getting weaker and weaker. According to this development, maybe in less than 10,000 years, my remaining consciousness will be completely swallowed by the world's law and become a truly ruthless law. This is not what I want. In addition to this method, I have another solution. God raised his eyes and looked into the void. Although there was nothing there, his eyes accurately captured the traces of the world's law. Say it. The voice of the world's law flowed slowly in the empty great cathedral. Give me Carrie. God's pupils shrank. I can now think of a way to separate myself from the world's law, but my remaining consciousness needs a carrier. The body of an ordinary angel can't bear my power. Carrie is the most suitable. I won't swallow Carrie. I will merge with her. At that time, she will be the embodiment of chaotic darkness, the natural ruler of darkness. God said flatly, impossible. Chaotic darkness was a little surprised. Why? Carrie is not so important compared to the balance of light and darkness. And I'm sure this is the way with the least loss. However, God still had a cold face. No. Chaotic darkness seemed to want to persuade him. God, think about it carefully. This method, God said in a cold voice, I know your plan. The so-called merge? Carrie will become a second personality at most. If your consciousness is more powerful, Carrie's body will be completely controlled by you. Chaotic darkness stopped talking. She did have selfish motives. It was much better to have a perfect body than to worry about the world's law swallowing her all the time. She did plan to merge with Carrie's consciousness. But if Carrie was too weak and swallowed by her during the merging, it would be out of her control. God saw it clearly. Chaotic darkness left. God summoned Lucifer. Lucifer heaved a sigh of relief as he walked out of the great cathedral. No matter what, it was great that God was fine. Gu Xingyin also found a pleasant surprise. The system was back. Hearing the sound of the tablet again, Gu Xingyin suddenly realized that she missed it. Where have you been all this time? She asked. The system replied, when this world was being transported, there was an accident with the world's laws. After the system sent the host into this world, the host was lost in the chaos, speaking of which, it was all thanks to Gu Xingyin that the system was able to locate the host's location. Gu Xingyin looked at the system. What's the mission in this world? The system replied, due to a teleportation error, the host has become an existence that should not have been born. The mission objective of this world is Judgment result, prevent Carrie from falling. Never fall from heaven? Gu Xingyin was baffled. Based on her current situation, the possibility of her falling from the sky was extremely small. Chapter 1845. Unless, Gu Xingyin once again guessed about the balance between light and dark. She had some vague guesses about this, but she wasn't sure. After thinking for a while, Gu Xingyin suddenly asked, System, is there an original plot in this world? The system shook its head. Gu Xingyin asked again, what about skill extraction? The system continued to shake its head. Due to the failure of the teleportation in this world, the host doesn't have the skill extraction. Gu Xingyin was speechless. So what should she do? The system continued, I can't appear frequently in this world. The god of creation is too powerful. I'm afraid that he can detect my presence. Gu Xingyin nodded in understanding. After a few words with Gu Xingyin, the system returned to its silent state. Gu Xingyin stayed alone in the palace for a while. She decided to gain God's favor. Although she was very sure that compared to the other creatures in this world, her presence was already strong enough. But who knew what would happen next? The system gave her the mission of not falling from heaven. Gu Xingyin had a feeling that things weren't that simple. Angels falling from heaven mostly happened because they violated the rules of heaven. Their souls were polluted and they couldn't stay in heaven anymore. Falling from heaven like this was mostly chosen by the angels themselves. Then, were there any who were forced to fall from heaven? Gu Xingyin thought to herself. She came to the door of the great sanctuary. God, she called out in a low voice. Carrie? God looked at the silver-haired seraph in confusion. Her face was still beautiful, but her expression seemed to be shrouded in a thin layer of blankness. It was rare to see Carrie like this. Gu Xingyin walked straight to the throne. God didn't stop her. Gu Xingyin walked to the throne with familiarity. Just like in the past, she bent her knees and rested her head on the god's knee. It was a very dependent and fragile posture. God, I'm very lost, she said in a low voice. Deity's gaze fell on her long silver hair. She wore a hair accessory that symbolized her status as a seraph. It was an exquisite gemstone hair chain, but it wasn't as dazzling as Carrie's. Deity did not speak. He waited for Gu Xingyin to continue. I don't know what I'm afraid of, but this place has always been very scary. She pressed against her heart. His head felt warm. Gu Xingyin raised her head in surprise. It was God who stroked the top of her head. God looked down at her and said, Don't worry, Carrie. I'm here. It was only a simple sentence, but Gu Xingyin smiled as if she had received a strong guarantee. She closed her eyes quietly. Being by God's side always gave her extra peace of mind. He actually fell asleep. A low voice rang out from the great cathedral. God didn't seem to think that an angel would fall asleep in front of him. He lowered his head and looked at half of Carrie's face that was exposed. Her calm expression was full of peace and trust. God looked at her face and was in a daze for a moment. Then he moved his fingers and prepared to put her somewhere else. But before he moved, the figure on his knee suddenly called out in a low voice, God. God waited for a moment, but he didn't hear anything else. Then he realized that she was just talking in her sleep. He was in Carrie's dream. This realization put the divinity in a good mood. Chapter 1846. But what happened next was beyond God's expectation. God moved his fingers, wanting to move Carrie to another place to rest. But before he could do anything, Carrie suddenly reached out and hugged his waist. God's body stiffened for a moment. It had been countless years since God was born. He had never had such an intimate moment with any creature. Even though this intimate partner was Carrie, whom he had always liked, God still felt very unnatural. He subconsciously wanted to pull Gu Shengyin's hand away. But Carrie was faster than him. The seraph, who was still in a sweet dream, leaned against God tightly. Her hands were around his waist, and the corners of her mouth were curled up. Obviously, the scene in the dream made her very happy. God lowered his head and looked at Carrie. His heart suddenly moved, and he stopped struggling. He moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in a bright sunshine. God looked around. This place was covered with green grass, blue sky, and white clouds. It looked like the human world. Carrie liked the human world? She had never been to the human world, had she? God was a little confused. This was Carrie's dream. When he was about to pull Carrie away, God suddenly changed his mind. He suddenly wanted to see what the dream looked like that could make Carrie smile so satisfactorily. The scene not far away attracted his attention. The two tall figures were walking slowly on the grass, hand in hand. God moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in front of the two figures. With just one glance, he was shocked. The one on the right with silver eyes and silver hair, smiling happily, was none other than Carrie. God had never seen such a bright smile on Carrie's face. In God's eyes, seraphs should be perfect. So Carrie had always been reserved and polite in heaven. She always had a perfect smile on her face. God used to like that smile, but seeing Carrie like this, God realized that Carrie could be so happy. This lively Carrie was more real than the perfect seraph in heaven. And the figure on the left, God's eyes darkened. The man with silver hair down to his ankles and indifferent golden eyes. God had seen that face for countless years. It was impossible for him to be wrong. That was himself. Carrie was the only seraph who had seen the true appearance of the gods through the holy light. Staring at their interlocked hands, Shen Luo saw the tenderness and attachment in Carrie's eyes when she looked at him. He felt as if he had discovered something that he had never noticed before. Heaven forbade desires, and he had never thought about that. Since when did Carrie have such thoughts about me? God felt that he should be angry. He should be angry because he had been blasphemed. He should punish Carrie, who dared to dream of being God, and not let her off easily. But no. He was just shocked and intrigued. But there was no disgust or revulsion. Deity stared blankly at the two figures walking towards the setting sun, getting further and further away. He was silent for a moment, and his figure gradually turned into a shadow. At the same time, the god on the throne opened his eyes. Carrie was still fast asleep. A satisfied and happy smile still hung on her face. The god's spirit looked at her with a complicated expression. Many emotions flashed through his golden eyes. In the end, he gently moved his hand and placed her on a soft couch in the great sage hall. Chapter 1847. At that time, Gu Shengyin had no idea that her dream had been accidentally spied on by God. She was immersed in her beautiful dream. Speaking of which, the God of creation in this world had a divine body made of the purest light element in the world. No matter how one looked at it, it was perfect. Gu Shengyin looked at the expressionless God beside her. While she was satisfied with her sight, she sighed with emotion. Even in the dream, God had such a cold and unapproachable appearance. It was hard to explain. She slept very well. The power of the Holy Spirit in the great cathedral was very strong. Ordinary gods and even seraphs might not be able to withstand it. But Gu Shengyin didn't feel anything at all. If one could withstand the power of the Holy Spirit, then the benefits one could enjoy would naturally be top-notch. Gu Shengyin felt that she was in a warm environment. It was as if she was lying in soft clouds. It made her want to sink into a sweeter dream. Fortunately, she still had a bit of reason. She finally remembered where she was. Gu Shengyin opened her eyes and looked around. This place was very familiar. In fact, after staying in Crystal Sky for hundreds of thousands of years, Gu Shengyin didn't know how many times she had come to the great cathedral. Of course, she was very familiar with all the decorations. She looked around and finally realized that she was in a side hall of the Great Sage Hall. So, she had fallen asleep while chatting with God? God didn't wake her up and send her to rest on a soft couch? Gu Xingyin didn't know what to think. She pursed her lips and smiled. She got up, tidied herself up, and walked toward the great cathedral. Sure enough, God still maintained the same posture, sitting on the throne. Gu Xingyin bowed her head and was a bit embarrassed. God, I was rude. She was talking about how she had fallen asleep in front of God. God's voice didn't sound strange at all. It's okay. Go and rest well. This probably meant that God didn't want to chat with her for the time being. Gu Xingyin quietly bowed to God and left the Great Sage Hall. As soon as Gu Xingyin's figure disappeared, the Book of Creation flew up impatiently. God, what do you plan to do with Princess Carrie? As the accompanying artifact of the gods, the Book of Creation could see everything that the gods could see. In other words, the Book of Creation had seen Gu Xingyin's dream clearly. The Book of Creation understood God very well. It knew that God would not tolerate such things, so it asked. God was at a loss for words. He was stumped by the Book of Creation. To be honest, when God realized that Carrie had unusual feelings for him, he did not want to respond. He even pretended that nothing had happened so that Carrie would not panic. It had never occurred to him to punish Carrie for this. It wasn't until the Book of Creation asked this question that he reacted. Why was he so tolerant of Carrie? Was it because she was a seraph? But if it was someone else and he knew that Meta or Gabriel had such feelings for him, what would he do? God thought carefully. He was sure that if he knew that other angels had such feelings for him, he would erase their emotions and memories without hesitation, even if they were seraphs. Chapter 1848. In the end, Carrie was different to him. God stared at the space in front of him, lost in thought. The Book of Creation didn't get an answer. It stopped in the air, confused. It didn't understand. Was it difficult to answer the question it asked? God, it asked tentatively. God came back to his senses and said quietly, I won't see Carrie for a while. She's just lost. She'll come to her senses after the baptism of time. The Book of Creation was speechless. That was it? Was the difference in treatment so obvious? The Book of Creation thought carefully and felt that there was something wrong with God's attitude. Compared to God's usual style, the difference was too obvious. The Book of Creation often saw things in the human world. The more it thought about it, the more it felt that God was a bit abnormal with Carrie. It asked cautiously, God, what do you think of Her Highness Carrie? God looked at it with indifferent golden eyes. What do you mean? He was impatient with this roundabout conversation. Seeing this, the Book of Creation went straight to the point. Don't you think that your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia is very strange? God, do you like Her Highness Carrie? God was speechless. He said coldly, I was born with a body of light. How can I have such a thing as desire? Book of Creation, have you been too idle recently? Is that why you're thinking about these things? The Book of Creation was speechless. Don't try to change the topic, I feel that your words have a hint of anger. But the Book of Creation didn't dare to say this. It closed its mouth, but it complained silently in its heart. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you're avoiding it. The Book of Creation could show all kinds of things in the world. In terms of theoretical knowledge, it could kill any existence in the world. No matter how it looked at it, it felt that God's reaction was very strange. It was like he was in love without knowing it. It wanted to remind God, but God seemed to dislike this topic. They couldn't communicate at all. So the Book of Creation had to give up. But anyway, you have enough time. If you want to avoid it, then so be it. The Book of Creation cursed silently, then closed its mouth and stopped talking. Gu Xingyin returned to her palace. She didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But soon, she realized that something was wrong. Under normal circumstances, the gods would summon her once every month. This was the first time after the creation celebration. In the 100,000 years since Gu Shengyin was born, she spent at least half of her time in the great cathedral accompanying the gods. Because at that time, she did not have a priesthood. But now, it had been half a year since he last saw a god. She never received another summons from the gods again. This was very wrong. Could it be that God is angry because I slept last time? Gu Shengyin shook her head. No, God would not be angry because of this. Even if he did, he would show it on the spot. Then, what had happened? Gu Shengyin couldn't figure it out. She decided to personally go to the Great Sage Hall and seek an audience with the gods. He went as he pleased. Gu Shengyin walked directly to the entrance of the Great Sage Hall. My God, Carrie requests an audience, she said softly. If God was willing to see her, she would naturally receive the message. If he wasn't, there was no response from the Great Sage Hall for a long time. 8 chapters. 2 chapters left. See you later, please vote, vote. Chapter 1849. Gu Shengyin stood at the door of the cathedral for a long time. This was the first time she'd been rejected by God. In the quiet Great Sage Hall, the Book of Creation watched as the silver figure left in loneliness and sighed. God, do you really not want to see Princess Carrie? God's faint voice sounded. Wait until she gives up the thoughts she shouldn't have in her heart. The Book of Creation was speechless. Okay, as long as you're happy. Actually, Gu Shengyin wasn't as lonely as the Book of Creation imagined. She was just a bit confused. What had happened? Why did God suddenly not want to see her? It was the complete opposite of God's attitude toward Carrie. God continued to summon Lucifer at the usual frequency. In the eyes of the other angels, this phenomenon was that God was favoring His Highness Lucifer more and more, while His Highness Carrie was no longer as favored as before. During one of the seraphs' regular meetings, Gabriel asked Gu Shengyin worriedly if she'd done something to make God unhappy. Gu Shengyin was completely confused. She said hesitantly, last time, when I met God, I fell asleep. Does that count? Gabriel was speechless. Yes, Princess Carrie, you're really amazing. When they met God, they were all very nervous and excited. They had to maintain their best manners at all times. This princess actually fell asleep. However, Gabriel thought about it and felt that with God's love for Princess Carrie, he wouldn't be angry over such a small thing, right? She looked at Gu Shengyin helplessly. I don't know either. Think about it carefully. After that, Gu Shengyin tried to go to the cathedral a few times, but every time, she was rejected by God. The most depressing thing was that once, she stood outside and watched Lucifer walk into the cathedral. After returning to her palace, Gu Shengyin asked the system gloomily, did I do something to make God hate me? The system's white light flashed, indicating that it didn't know either. Gu Shengyin was still thinking seriously when Lucifer arrived. He had clearly just come out of the great cathedral, and there was a Holy Spirit energy that Gu Shengyin couldn't be more familiar with. He looked at Gu Shengyin's face with obvious worry. Jiao Yen. Gu Shengyin bowed to him. Your Highness. Lucifer looked at her and hesitated. He had only vaguely heard that Carrie had not been summoned by God recently. But he never thought that things would be this serious. Not being summoned by the gods and being rejected were two completely different concepts. Before Lucifer left, he even took the initiative to say, God, I think I saw Carrie outside the great cathedral. However, the gods did not reply to him. Lucifer felt that the gods did not seem to be angry or disgusted with Carrie, so it was very strange. Gu Shengyin knew what he wanted to ask. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. I also don't know how I angered God. In other words, she also didn't understand anything. She looked at Lucifer and suddenly said, Your Highness, can I ask for leave? Lucifer looked at her in confusion. Gu Shengyin said, Since I was born, I have never left heaven. Can I go to the human world? Chapter 1850. Lucifer glanced at Gu Shengyin. There was no special expression on this companion's face, but Lucifer automatically imagined her sad face because of God's reaction. It was good to go and relax. Lucifer thought for a moment and felt that there was no special problem for Carrie to deal with at Angel Academy, so he nodded immediately. No problem, you can play for a while. Gu Shengyin laughed. She was really curious about the human world in this world. This was a world where everyone believed in God. There were elves, dragons, and strange beasts in the human world. It should be a completely different scene from heaven. She stepped out of the moon through the transmission array. It was the first time she left heaven. Gu Shengyin stood in the void, looking at the holy gate of heaven with a slight smile on her face. Then she flew quickly toward the human world. In the great sage hall, a god and a book both saw this scene. The book of creation said, "Her Highness Carrie has gone to the human world." God didn't have any reaction. With Carrie's strength, there was nothing in the world that could hurt her. As deity thought about this, he suddenly realized something. He wanted to distance himself from Carrie. Why couldn't he help but focus on her as soon as she left his sight? God's heart skipped a beat. He lowered his eyes and withdrew his gaze from Gu Shengyin. He had to get rid of this habit. Gu Shengyin landed in the wilderness. She used her divine sense, and the scene within a radius of 10,000 miles appeared in front of her. The next moment, she moved her feet and appeared thousands of miles away. This was a human city. Compared to heaven, which was exquisite everywhere, this city was so simple and crude that it was terrible. However, it was this imperfection that gave the city a sense of liveliness. Gu Shengyin walked into the city. There were many people in the city. Women with cloth wrapped around their heads walked hurriedly on the streets. Many young and old men were hawking on the streets. In front of them were simple handicrafts made by themselves. Gu Shengyin's arrival attracted almost everyone's attention. Even in heaven, which was full of beauties, only Lucifer could compare to Carrie's beauty, let alone in the mortal world. There was a strange silence on the street. Everyone seemed to be worshipping Gu Shengyin as she walked through the bustling street. Soon, they came to their senses. Then, Gu Shengyin found that the people here were too enthusiastic. The women wearing thick headscarves took off the beads on their wrists and handed them to her. The men handed over their most exquisite trinkets to her. Even the children carefully opened their hands to give her candies that they had treasured for a long time. Gu Shengyin was stunned for a moment. She had never thought that she would be so welcomed. Was it just because he was good-looking? She thought it was funny. But soon, she felt that it was a little troublesome. Because she realized that her arrival seemed to have affected the normal lives of these humans. Gu Shengyin thought for a moment and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Her figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Those humans were looking at her with admiration. Now that she suddenly disappeared, they were so excited that they shouted loudly. Some of the older people even knelt on the ground. In this era where the belief of the gods was strong, messengers of the gods were not rare in the mortal world. Obviously, these humans regarded Gu Shengyin as the messenger of the gospel. Update 10, today's update is over. If there is time tomorrow, I will continue to update 10,000 times to make up for what I owe. Good night, everyone. Love you. At the same time, I would also like to ask for some tickets. Speaking of which, do the students have a holiday during the weekend? Chapter 1851. Gu Shengyin looked at this scene from afar and waved her hand. A rain of holy light fell from the sky and landed on the humans. Many of them felt refreshed and the impurities in their bodies disappeared without a trace. Seeing this scene, they were even more convinced that the celestial-like person they saw just now was really an emissary sent by God. Gu Shengyin turned around and planned to leave. She realized that her appearance was not suitable to appear in an ordinary human gathering place. In the next second, her movements paused. The scene in front of her suddenly changed. The plains disappeared, the trees disappeared, and the road under her feet also disappeared. The entire space turned into a thick black color. And Gu Shengyin was the only ray of light in this thick darkness. Her expression did not change as she said coldly, "Chaotic darkness?" Other than chaotic darkness, she could not think of anyone else who could pull her into this foreign domain without her knowing. A soft laugh sounded. A familiar black figure appeared in front of Gu Shengyin. "Long time no see, Carrie." The black-robed woman who looked exactly like Carrie said with a smile. Gu Shengyin tried to break free from this domain but helplessly found that it was useless. Chaotic darkness seemed to have discovered her purpose. She did not stop her and only said with a smile, "It's useless. This is something I prepared especially for you. Carrie, I have waited for so long. The day when you are not in the crystal sky has finally come. What's more perfect is that God's gaze does not fall on you." Gu Shengyin gave up on the idea of breaking through. She looked at chaotic darkness seriously and asked, "What do you want to do?" It seemed that chaotic darkness had been planning this for a long time. Chaotic darkness did not hide her purpose. "Of course I want to become one with you." Chaotic darkness, as the name implied, was the source of darkness. If Gu Shengyin really became one with her, her light attribute would definitely be devoured by the darkness. At that time, heaven would no longer be able to contain her. Could this be the reason why the system gave her the mission of not falling from the sky? As long as an angel was tainted by the power of darkness and evil, their core would mutate and their faith would be shaken. That was the beginning of their downfall. Seeing the obvious resistance on Gu Shengyin's face, Chaos Darkness was somewhat puzzled. "You seem very reluctant. So why not?" Chaotic Darkness said, "If you choose to fuse with me, with your strength and my attributes, the newly born Carrie will definitely be the most powerful king of darkness. No one can restrain you anymore, and God can't command you anymore. Isn't it much better than being a boring seraph in heaven?" Gu Shengyin lowered her eyes. "I was born with light, and there is only light in my heart." The Chaos Darkness stopped talking. In fact, she had seen the angels' firm belief in the light and the gods. She didn't understand at all what kind of thing faith was to make them so persistent. She felt that she and Carrie were at odds on these matters. Since that was the case, there was no need to continue the conversation. Since they couldn't reach a consensus, it was better to use their actions directly. The thick darkness pressed down on Gu Shengyin. Gu Shengyin's body lit up with a dazzling light, forcing the darkness back. Chaotic Darkness was surprised. There's actually such a powerful force? Chapter 1852. This was the first time Gu Shengyin had fully displayed her power. Chaotic Darkness was also shocked. But she was prepared. From the beginning, she had considered Gu Shengyin's power in the best possible way. Now, although the power Gu Shengyin had displayed was beyond Chaotic Darkness' expectations, it was still within her control. Gu Shengyin watched as the dark power slowly invaded her body. Pain. Extreme pain. Although her body was not a real seraph, it had been bathed in the light attribute since birth. After hundreds of thousands of years, under the baptism of the powerful Holy Spirit of the Great Cathedral, her body was almost comparable to a natural body of light. How did it feel to have a pure body of light forcefully invaded by darkness? Gu Shengyin felt as if her body had become a battlefield. The dark power from the outside world and the light power in her body were fiercely fighting against each other. So tenacious. Chaotic Darkness looked at Gu Shengyin's body, which was so pale that it was almost transparent because of the pain, and a trace of confusion flashed through its dark eyes. Was it because of that strange belief again? She would rather endure such great pain than fall into depravity. System. Gu Shengyin gritted her teeth to maintain her clarity. "I can't hold on any longer." Her tone was a little difficult. "Tell me, what can I do to not fall?" The system's body flashed with white light. "Maintain your clarity. As long as your core is not contaminated, no matter what happens, you will not fall. As long as your core is pure, even if your body is burned by the light power, you will have a way to return to normal when you return to heaven." Gu Shengyin understood the system's meaning. Maintaining the purity of the core was to maintain absolute clarity in such extreme pain. Because once there was a flaw in her consciousness, she could be taken advantage of by Chaotic Darkness. Cold sweat dripped from the corner of her forehead. She could already feel the taste of blood between her lips and teeth. Gu Shengyin could clearly feel that her body was being burned inch by the dark power. In her consciousness, there was only rejection left. Rejection of all the dark power approaching. But it was so painful. God, why didn't you come and save me? You still refuse to give up. Chaos Darkness looked at the figure in front of him. It was already the 6th day. The silver-haired figure in front of him was already shrouded in a thick layer of black fog. Her body was completely surrounded by the power of darkness. However, the dark energy could only strut around her body. His eyes were still pure silver. Only when her core turned black and her eyes were stained with darkness could the fusion between them be considered a true success. Chaos Darkness was a little anxious. She spoke in a low voice, and her voice drifted into Gu Shengyin's ears. What are you still holding on for? Carrie, you're in so much pain. Your God didn't even come. He gave up on you. Carrie, you're no longer pure. You belong to the darkness. These voices kept echoing in Gu Shengyin's mind. Her consciousness began to fall into a trance. The system panicked. It called out to its host again and again, trying to remind her not to give up. Gu Shengyin could no longer feel her body. Why hasn't God come yet? I can't hold on anymore. God, have you really given up on me? God, the pair of pale golden eyes on the throne suddenly opened. Chapter 1853. He felt inexplicably flustered. God had never felt this way since the creation of the world. What happened? God looked from heaven to the human world. Where was Carrie? He finally realized that something was wrong. He couldn't find Carrie. There shouldn't be any place in the world that the God of creation couldn't see, unless someone deliberately blinded his perception. The golden light in God's golden eyes soared, and his huge divine sense swept to every corner of the world. With just one glance, God was furious. Damn chaotic darkness. Chaotic darkness, who was waiting for Carrie to surrender, felt something in her heart. Oh no, God noticed it. She wanted to leave, but she couldn't. God came to Carrie's side in an instant. His golden eyes widened, and he looked at the figure in front of him who was covered by the strong dark power in disbelief. Was this Carrie? God waved his hand, and a gentle golden light fell on Gu Shengyin's body. The layer of black fog on the surface of her body was all dispelled. Gu Shengyin half opened her eyes and tried to look at God. She opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, her mouth just fell down weakly. She closed her eyes peacefully. No matter what, God finally came. Deity reached out his hand subconsciously and held Carrie's falling body. With just one touch, he knew how bad she was at the moment. The dark power on the surface of her body was just a small matter. There was still a strong dark power raging inside her body. He temporarily suppressed the dark power, but he couldn't expel it in a short time. God looked at chaotic darkness with his cold golden eyes. For the first time, God showed his anger so clearly. Damn you. Chaotic darkness just looked at Gu Shengyin with pity. If God had noticed it a little later, one day in the human world would have been just a moment in heaven. She was so close. She was so close to completely merging with the body in front of her. But now, all her efforts were in vain. Chaotic darkness also knew that the silver-haired God in front of her wouldn't give her any more chances. She sighed and said, I admit defeat, God. I should have died long ago, but I shouldn't be in your hands. You can't hurt me. As she spoke, her body suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. The black illusion also disappeared in an instant, revealing the blue sky and white clouds that belonged to the human world. God did not move. He let the chaotic darkness leave. He knew very well that chaos darkness was right. He couldn't do anything to her. The current chaotic darkness had already completely merged with the world's laws. Unless he fought against the laws of the entire world, he would not be able to do anything to the chaos darkness. Even if he could defeat the laws of the world, it would be useless. The law of the world was just an emotionless law of life. Even if he were to kill it, the ones who would suffer would only be the living beings in the world that he had once personally created. This debt, he would remember it well. God looked down at the figure in his arms. The next moment, he appeared in the great cathedral. As the rich Holy Spirit power came rushing toward him, Gu Shengyin, who had been lying quietly in the arms of the god, suddenly began to tremble violently. It hurts, the dark power, which had been suppressed by God, suddenly encountered such a powerful dark power. It seemed to have sensed danger and started to fight back in her body again. It seemed to want to make a final struggle. Chapter 1854. God, I'm in so much pain. The silver hair of the figure in his arms was already wet with cold sweat. She opened her unfocused eyes and stared blankly at the empty space in front of her. She could only scream unconsciously. God's heart twitched. Looking at Carrie like this, an emotion that he had never felt before rose in his heart. Close to the left side of his heart, there was a faint, fine pain. He put Gu Shengyin into the holy pond of the great cathedral. The holy pond was completely golden with faith and Holy Spirit power. Gu Shengyin used to like this place the most. But now, as soon as her body sank in, the water in the holy pond boiled. Before she could scream in pain, a warm body hugged her from behind. Cool and gentle energy flowed into Gu Shengyin's body from every part of her body. When the dark power encountered this cool and gentle energy, it all retreated anxiously as if it had encountered a flood or a ferocious beast. But how could their speed compare to this energy? Like spring snow meeting the sun, the dark power was swallowed and melted when it encountered this energy. Nothing was left. The pain in her body seemed to slowly lessen. The pain on Gu Shengyin's face gradually disappeared, and she gradually calmed down. She let out a soft moan and relaxed her back, leaning towards the back of the bed. Her body's instincts told her that she could rely on that place. God's miracle doctor froze because of this. Just now, to ensure that his divine power could be used on Carrie to the greatest extent, he used a spell to take off their clothes. Earlier, he was anxious, and Carrie's body was stiff from the pain. He didn't notice this at all. But now, he could feel Carrie's soft body leaning into his arms. He could clearly feel her soft and smooth skin rubbing against his body. God, he had never had such an intimate moment with any living creature. At this time, the book of creation appeared out of nowhere. God, your ears are a bit red. Pa. God waved his hand subconsciously. The book of creation flew out of the holy church in a parabola and landed at the feet of a seraph. Lucifer, who was just about to report to the holy church. When he saw what was under his feet, his pupils shrank. He recognized the book of creation, the divine artifact that accompanied God. Who would dare to throw the book of creation around like that? There was only one answer. Lucifer stopped in his tracks. He bent down and picked up the book of creation that was lying on the ground, pretending to be dead. He closed it again and asked gently, "Book of creation, is it inconvenient for God to see me now?" The book of creation had always been fond of the beautiful Lucifer. It cleared its throat, intending to maintain its dignity as a divine artifact, and said with a serious tone, "The God is currently busy. If there is nothing important, Your Highness, please come back another day." If they were to disturb God at this time, even His Highness Lucifer wouldn't have a good ending. Lucifer was quite perceptive. He hurriedly said, "There is nothing important. I will come back another day." After Lucifer left, the book of creation looked sadly at the sky. Sigh, I don't know if God can truly understand my feelings this time. 4 chapters. I'll try to write 2 more chapters before dinner. Begging for monthly votes. The monthly votes list has been dropping since the 2nd. Crying. Chapter 1855. Gu Shengyin was still a little confused. As far as she could remember, she had never seen such a god. Without the layer of holy light that always separated him from the world, there seemed to be a trace of human emotions in his indifferent golden eyes. However, he was indeed the god of creation. God, she shouted uncertainly. God's gaze softened. He reached out a hand. Gu Shengyin was a little confused. God said, "You've been asleep for a long time." Gu Shengyin was confused. So, was there something wrong? Although she was puzzled, Gu Shengyin still obediently reached out her hand and put it in God's hand. It turned out that God's palm was so warm. Then, she stood up. The moment she supported her body with her legs, Gu Shengyin finally understood why God reached out to her. Her leg muscles were sore and weak, and she couldn't exert any strength at all. What was wrong with her? Gu Shengyin's attention returned to her body from God's abnormality. She confirmed her previous feeling. She couldn't find the slightest bit of light energy in her body now. In other words, Carrie, who was once powerful enough to be comparable to the seraph in heaven, had now become a useless person with an empty body. God wrapped his arms around Gu Shengyin's waist and held her in his arms. Gu Shengyin was shocked. She felt that this God was very strange. She looked at God in shock. Based on her understanding of gods over the past tens of thousands of years, God was definitely not such a gentle God who would casually allow others to get close to him. So, how long had she been asleep? What had happened in this short period of time? God naturally saw Gu Shengyin's surprise. He didn't explain anything. After confirming that Carrie seemed to have lost the power to walk freely for the time being, he directly exerted force in his arms and carried her up. If Gu Shengyin's emotions were countless messy symbols when she was held by God earlier, then now, they were a bunch of incomprehensible codes. God, she said with difficulty. Carrie can do it herself. God's hand didn't move as he walked towards the holy pond. You can walk? He asked indifferently. Gu Shengyin felt a little strange. He could have just teleported her directly to the holy pond, so why did he have to carry her personally? The next moment, she was surrounded by a warm energy. Then, she realized that her body was empty, and the clothes on her body had disappeared. Gu Shengyin. There was still a God on the other side. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at his expression. As expected, his face was still calm, as if he didn't care about the perfect body in front of him at all. But even so, it was still very embarrassing. God said, 3,000 years ago, you were attacked by chaos darkness. The light power in your body was polluted. It has been completely purified by the holy pond. What he said was basically what Gu Shengyin had been through all these years. 3,000 years? Gu Shengyin was a little dizzy from this timeline. Was this really heaven? The days passed like flowing water. Then, the power in her body was purified, which meant, from today onwards, you need to start absorbing the light power again and slowly recover your previous strength, God said. Gu Shengyin nodded. Although she felt like she had returned to the time before liberation, she had nothing to do in heaven anyway. Chapter 1856. God looked at Carrie with a calm expression. He didn't seem to be very disappointed. He was relieved. God knew that many angels were very obsessed with power. Losing great power was something that many angels could not accept. He was worried that Carrie would be sad, but obviously, he underestimated Carrie's temperament. That was good. In that case, it was time to get down to business. Gu Shengyin found that God, who should have left, didn't leave. Instead, he looked at her with a serious face. His eyes made her a little confused. She also felt a little guilty. Wait, why did she feel guilty? Gu Shengyin thought about it and felt that she didn't do anything. So she asked, God, what's the matter? She meant that if there was nothing, he could go back to the great sage hall. God nodded solemnly and said, yes, there is something. Gu Shengyin wanted to say that even if he had something to do, he could wait for a while. It seemed inconvenient for her now. Then God spoke. I'm hugging you. Don't you like it? Gu Shengyin's eyelids trembled. What kind of question was that? She looked at God with confusion. She really wanted to pull out the system and ask if the person in front of her had been possessed. But the clear lotus fragrance and the familiar soul feeling from the person beside her made her know that the person in front of her had always been the God of creation. He had never changed. So, what was wrong with him? Was God stimulated by something? No, that was not the point now. The point was, how should she answer now? Say that she liked him? To be honest, she did like him. But according to the laws of heaven, God didn't like this kind of thing. Gu Shengyin couldn't guarantee what kind of reaction God would have if she said she liked him. But he didn't like her. She didn't want to lie against her heart. God looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he asked, "Is it difficult to answer my question?" Gu Shengyin looked up and nodded gently. "I like it." She decided to tell the truth. Since she said she liked him, she might as well go all out. Gu Shengyin looked up at God and said, "Carrie likes to be close to God." After she finished speaking, she looked at God in front of her and waited for his reaction. Then, in the next moment, his body was surrounded by a wave of warmth. It wasn't the warmth of the holy pond, but a real body. Gu Shengyin was terrified. "Save me. What happened in the past 3,000 years? Why can't I understand it at all?" Deity said in a low voice, "That's good. I also like being close to Carrie." Gu Shengyin was stunned. What did she just hear? Gu Shengyin stood there in a daze, allowing their skin to touch. She forcefully closed her eyes and felt the warmth around her. Once again, she was sure that she was not dreaming. She turned around and faced the god's face. Her voice trembled as she said, "God." His golden eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. His lips didn't move, but his low voice sounded in the center of her mind. "Don't doubt what's in front of you, Carrie. I like you." Gu Shengyin's eyes suddenly widened because of this. It seemed that at this moment, Carrie's emotions controlled her. Shock, ecstasy, and sadness made her want to cry. She had buried the feelings in her heart for hundreds of thousands of years. She was even prepared to never say them out loud. Who would have thought that one day she would get a response? The 8th update. There are 2 more updates. Tomorrow, I'll try to set an update time on time so that everyone doesn't have to update all the time. After the last 2 updates, I'll think about which time is better. See you later. Chapter 1857. Gu Shengyin stared at God in a daze. She only felt that everything in front of her was too unreal. How did you? She wanted to ask so many things, but when she opened her mouth, she forgot where to start. A gentle kiss landed on her eyelashes. Don't doubt it. Don't be nervous. Jiao Yan, accept me. Just like accepting the faith from the light. That's good. Nobody knew when it started, but the water in the sacred pond started to sway gently. A low sobbing sound rang out, and then, it was forcefully blocked by something. There was no day or night in heaven. The Book of Creation squatted on the throne, bored. It was connected to the God of Creation's body and mind. At this moment, the Book of Creation was very clear about what its master was doing. Finally, it was enlightened. It thought with relief. A gust of wind from somewhere suddenly blew. The pages of the Book of Creation flipped automatically and landed on a certain page. The Book of Creation's heart shook. This was the scene of the future that it and God had forcibly seen together. But this time, it wasn't forcibly seen. The Book of Creation had automatically shown it. There was only one possibility for the future to appear in the Book of Creation, an established and unchangeable fate. The Book of Creation suddenly felt that any gossip was meaningless. Its low voice sighed in the great cathedral. Your Highness, when God appeared in the great cathedral again, the Book of Creation had returned to its former appearance. How is Her Highness Jiao Yan? It asked. God glanced at it. A little tired. She's resting now. The Book of Creation didn't speak. God sat on the throne. After a long time, he suddenly said, What did you see? As the master of the Book of Creation, he naturally sensed certain things. Seeing that God asked, the Book of Creation didn't say anything. Its body floated automatically, and a scene appeared in the void. God watched this scene expressionlessly from beginning to end. In the end, he lowered his noble head. I'm sorry, the Book of Creation comforted its master. It's not your fault, God. This is destiny. God suddenly looked up. What is destiny? As the God of creation, why can't I go against the will of heaven? The Book of Creation. It didn't know how to answer this question. In the end, deity fell silent. When Gu Xingyin woke up again, she was still on the bed where she woke up for the first time. But this time, she finally knew where she was. In the sleeping chamber of God. Of course, God usually sat on his throne, and this sleeping chamber was rarely used. She sat up. Thanks to the powerful recovery ability of this body, she did not feel any strong discomfort. Once again, he sighed with emotion. As expected of a god, this powerful endurance, she remembered that she seemed to have fainted in the end. The soft, snow-white quilt slid down from her body, revealing her naked body under the brocade. Starting from her collarbone, faint circles of red marks appeared on Carrie's pure and holy face, tainting it with the charm of lust. Gu Xingyin habitually looked inside her body and was surprised to find that there was a strong power of light in her body. Although it couldn't be compared to before she fainted, it was much better than when she had just woken up. Chapter 1858. The power of faith in the holy pond was so powerful. Gu Xingyin thought of something and blushed. At this time, God's voice sounded in her ear, "You're awake?" Gu Xingyin responded softly. Then she put on her clothes and walked into the great cathedral. God was still the same as before, but when he saw Gu Xingyin come out, he removed the power of light from his body. Come here. God reached out to her. Gu Xingyin walked forward without hesitation and reached out her hand. Then God pulled her into his arms. Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. Even if they were in a relationship, God didn't look like someone who would do such intimate things. God seemed to see her doubts. He explained softly, "The Book of Creation told me that you would like this." Gu Xingyin's ears blushed quietly. The Book of Creation squatting next to the throne was speechless. God, please don't be so straightforward about some things. You deserve to be single for hundreds of thousands of years. But after God said this sentence, it seemed to have a good effect. The slight discomfort in Gu Xingyin's heart magically disappeared. Maybe when she was shy and uncomfortable, she suddenly found that the other person was a stranger than her. She suddenly calmed down. God said, "I will make our relationship public at the next creation celebration." Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. The first surprise was that God was going to make their relationship public. In this case, some laws in heaven would have to be changed. Gu Xingyin was also curious about what kind of new identity God was going to prepare for her. There was a second point. Why was it the next creation celebration? Was there anything special about it? She asked the question. God replied, "Of course you are my queen. Since you and I are together, it is natural for you to be my queen." As for the second point, God hesitated for a moment and then said, "Something bad will happen at the next creation celebration. Carrie, it's not appropriate to announce this news." Gu Xingyin always felt that when God said something bad, there was a moment of guilt on his face. However, the guilt only lasted for a moment. She wasn't sure if it was just her imagination. Her attention was quickly attracted by something else, something that even God thought was bad. She was a little worried. But he also knew that since God didn't say what it was definitely not suitable for him to know. The two of them chatted for a while. God suddenly said, "You have been in a coma for so many years. Lucian and the others are very worried. Now that you have woken up, go and meet with them." Gu Xingyin also felt that she needed to inform her companions. She returned to her palace and sent a message to the other blazing angels in her own name. The archangel's residence was the closest to the crystal sky. Lucifer was also the first to arrive at Gu Xingyin's place. He had a joyful smile on his face. "You're finally awake, Carrie." Gu Xingyin smiled at Lucifer. "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. I'm fine now." However, the smile on Lucifer's face stopped the next moment. His pale blue eyes were once again covered with melancholy. Your body, obviously, he had noticed that something was wrong with Gu Shengyin's body. Had Xing Jin's power, which was comparable to his, disappeared? Gu Shengyin herself didn't care very much. Seeing Lucifer like this, she took the initiative to comfort him. It's not a big deal. You will slowly recover in the future. Chapter 1859. There was still a trace of worry in Lucifer's eyes, but when Gu Shengyin looked over, he tried to make himself show a relaxed smile. He knew in his heart that since Carrie said that, she definitely didn't want to see her companions worry about her. The other seraphs also came quickly. Michael was still making a ruckus. When he saw Gu Shengyin, he said hurriedly, Jiao Yan, you're finally awake. I heard from God that you were injured and unconscious. Now, he was halfway through his words when he stopped halfway. Obviously, like Lucifer, Michael also noticed that there was something wrong with Gu Shengyin's body. The other seraphs also looked at her with worried eyes. Gu Shengyin could only repeat her conversation with Lucifer again and said that she was fine and didn't need to be too worried. Medellin saw that she didn't seem to want to talk about this topic, so he smiled and said something casually to change the topic. Gu Shengyin was attracted by what Medellin said. She asked curiously, Medellin, you said that an emissary who specializes in spreading the gospel of God has appeared in the human world and is already regarded as God's spokesperson in the mortal world? Medellin nodded with a look of admiration. Yes, I once went down to the human world to see the Holy Son. He is indeed a very outstanding believer. His words didn't hide his praise for the mortal called Holy Son at all. Lucifer also smiled and said, it is a great fortune for God to have such a believer in the human world. Gu Shengyin frowned slightly. She always felt that when she heard the name Messiah, she had a strange feeling in her heart. Maybe she was thinking too much. She comforted herself. He was just a mortal. Even if he was a great sage and wise man in the human world, what did it matter if his soul was taken into heaven after death? He and the seraphs had no conflict at all. At this time, Gu Shengyin didn't know that she thought of everything too simply. At this time, when the 8 seraphs of heaven talked about the Holy Son called Messiah, they still smiled and didn't pay attention to it. The lifespan of mortals was short. Moreover, a day in heaven was equivalent to a year in the mortal world. Gu Shengyin soon saw the true appearance of the Messiah. God had personally conveyed the oracle to all the angels, go to the great cathedral and have an audience with the Holy Son. Gu Shengyin was shocked. God actually used the word audience. Since the birth of heaven, there had only ever been 8 blazing angels who were qualified to be met by all the angels. Was God going to bestow this mortal with supreme glory? She arrived at the great sage hall and looked at her companions. She could clearly see the bewilderment on their faces. Lucifer was still standing closest to God. As long as he stood there, he would be the most dazzling existence among the many seraphs. Just like his title, Brilliant Morning Star, the brightest star at dawn before the birth of dawn. Many angels didn't understand what was going on, but when they saw the gentle smile on His Highness Lucifer's face, they calmed down. God came quickly. At the same time, all the angels discovered that when God appeared on the throne, a figure also appeared in the void in front of him. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a holy smile on his face. His appearance was very beautiful, not inferior even among the angels. Chapter 1860. He did not look around. Instead, he lowered his head slightly and faced the God in front of him with a very respectful posture. God's indifferent voice reached the ears of all the angels. Holy Son Messiah, my substitute in the human world, the great wise one who preaches the gospel. Now that you have returned to heaven, you should be a seraph. As soon as God's voice fell, the spirit of speech instantly took effect. Gu Shengyin, who was not far from Messiah, clearly sensed that as the God's words fell, the power in Messiah's body in front of her was continuing to grow at a very terrifying speed. That powerful and uncontrollable aura directly forced her body to go soft and she almost retreated. A hand promptly supported her body from behind, and a gentle light energy flowed into her body, offsetting the discomfort she felt. Gu Shengyin knew who it was. The only one standing on her right was the seraph Captain Lucifer. Gu Xingyin could not speak now. She could only turn her head and smile gratefully at Lucifer. She knew that if she had really been forced back by Messiah's aura just now, then in the eyes of the other angels, she would not be able to defeat Messiah. Although heaven was not purely based on strength, if she really showed that she was not as good as Messiah, her prestige among the angels would definitely be greatly reduced. Gu Xingyin did not have any hostility toward this companion, but she did not want to be used as a stepping stone on the first day of his official debut. Messiah seemed to take a while to adapt to his new identity. He knelt down excitedly to God, indicating that from now on, he would be more determined in his faith and serve God wholeheartedly. The next ceremony was for Holy Son Messiah to accept the worship of all the angels as a seraph. Looking at Messiah, who was worshipped by countless high-level angels, a strange thought suddenly arose in Gu Xingyin's mind. Something seemed to have changed in this heaven. It was different from her worries. The other seraphs were still very welcoming to the sudden addition of a companion, although it was a little sudden. In their minds, being able to get the approval of God meant that Messiah was indeed worthy of this honor. In the eyes of the angels, the will of the gods was the highest law. Messiah's personality was very good. Compared to the seraphim highnesses who had always been high and mighty in the hearts of the angels, he was more easygoing. Soon, he had a large group of admirers in heaven. Gu Xingyin felt more and more uneasy. She always felt that there was a special meaning behind God's actions. She went to see God alone. There was no intimate snuggling. She knelt on the white jade floor of the great sage hall in an extremely serious and pious manner, expressing her uneasiness. Deity listened to her quietly. Gu Xingyin felt a gentle force lift her up. Then the words of God rang in her ears, "Carrie, I'm going to do something that I'm very unwilling to do, but I can't change. Don't get involved." This matter, for the first time, Gu Xingyin realized that there were still things in this world that the God of creation could not solve. A thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Was it because of the balance between light and darkness? She knew this. She had seen the flaw of this world a long time ago. The power of light was too strong. Chapter 1861. As a person who had once been a god, Gu Xingyin was very clear about one thing. That was, for two opposing elements, it was not a good thing for one side to be strong. One side would weaken while the other would strengthen. Whether it was light or darkness, it was not a good thing for the stability of the world. When one side fell into an extreme stage of weakness, the elements of the entire world would collapse. And the best symbiotic state was to balance each other. On this basis, whether it was light or darkness, they would develop in the most prosperous direction. This trend was the correct path for the world to reach the most prosperous stage. But this world obviously did not take this path. At least since Gu Xingyin was born, she had never found any existence in the dark camp that could lead hell to prosperity. Relying on those demon kings who only knew how to fight, wine, and beauty, hell would be finished sooner or later. Gu Xingyin returned to her palace. She did not rest, but sat quietly in the hall alone and began to slowly think about the way God might do it. Judging from the current ratio of light and dark forces, the difference was too great. Unless the dark side could give birth to a new god, then it would be possible to slowly recover its vitality and make hell a place that could compete with heaven again. If there was a god of darkness, it would not have waited until now. Since the God of creation was the light, in any case, the advantage of heaven had clearly been revealed. Then, there was another possibility, which was to weaken the power of the light camp. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. She did not understand. Why did God still give the honor of the Holy Son Messiah at such a time? The combat power of a seraph was equivalent to that of a demon king. And the number of seraphs in heaven had far exceeded the number of demon kings in hell. This would only further exacerbate the imbalance between light and darkness. Unless, her heart skipped a beat. "Carrie, I am going to do something that I am very unwilling to do, but I can't change." She did not dare to think about it anymore. "God, what exactly do you want to do?" Because of her body, Gu Xingyin had not been to Angel Academy for a long time. And she also knew that during her sleep, the major events of Angel Academy were basically decided by Lucifer. Gu Xingyin was convinced by this perfect archangel. She always felt that there was nothing in this world that Lucifer did not know. She thought of the group of cute little fellows from Angel Academy and walked into the teleportation array. "Your Highness Messiah, I want to play too." Her Highness Messiah. As soon as she entered Angel Academy, Gu Xingyin saw a figure playing with many little angels. The Sun Messiah. Just like Carrie, God did not give him a specific position. Other than accompanying God, Messiah was free for the rest of his time. Seeing his body playing with the little angels, Gu Xingyin had to admit that Messiah indeed had a very outstanding personality. The little guys standing at the side saw Gu Xingyin. "Are you the Highness from above?" The little fellow pointed to the sky. In the eyes of little angels, the more beautiful an angel was, the more powerful they were. The angel in front of him was so good-looking. He must be a very powerful prince. Gu Xingyin smiled. "Yes, I." Before Gu Xingyin finished speaking, she found that Messiah had walked in front of her. "Your Highness Carrie." Messiah looked at Gu Xingyin with eyes full of amazement. Chapter 1862. Gu Xingyin had no choice but to nod at him. Messiah. Her position among the seraphs was recognized as second only to the seraph leader, so she didn't need to bow to Messiah. "Your Highness Kalia." The little angel widened her eyes in surprise. Gu Xingyin could clearly see her figure in her pure green eyes. The little angel blinked her big eyes and looked at Gu Xingyin excitedly. "I heard from Teacher Guard that your Highness Kalia is our dean, right?" Gu Xingyin couldn't help but pinch the little angel's little face. "Yes, but I had something to do before, so I haven't been here for a long time." The little angel immediately hugged Gu Xingyin's thigh. Gu Xingyin, since when did hugging someone's thigh become popular in heaven? Then, even more little angels crowded around them. They had all heard that Her Highness Kalia, who had never shown her face, was here and were very curious. After coming over and seeing Gu Xingyin's face, which could be said to be one of the best in the world, they immediately forgot about Messiah, who was playing with them before. They surrounded Gu Xingyin and asked all kinds of questions. Messiah smiled as she looked at Gu Xingyin, who was surrounded by little angels. But there was a hint of helplessness in her eyes. After such a long time, she finally realized, although the angels treated her very respectfully, and she tried her best to integrate into heaven. But in the hearts of the angels, she was still different from those who were born as seraphs. Although they respected her, it was better to say that they respected her more because she was the Holy Son and equal to the seraphs. But not because of Messiah. But the other seraphs were different. Looking at the reactions of the angels and little angels, she knew. They admired and were curious about Kalia, not Her Highness Kalia. And His Highness Lucifer. Messiah thought of the seraph leader who was so powerful that she couldn't help but want to submit to him. His Highness Lucifer was an existence that could make the angels willingly submit to him, right? Even if he was not a radiant morning star, nor was he heaven's deputy ruler, his personal charm was enough to make many angels follow him. Messiah withdrew her gaze. She looked at Carrie, who was surrounded by the little angels, and left quietly. The atmosphere in heaven was a little strange recently. Ever since Her Highness Messiah came down, God had doted on him more and more. No matter what he did, he would bring Messiah with him. Messiah had entered the great cathedral more than any other blazing angel. He even surpassed His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie. Everyone in heaven could see how much God relied on Her Highness Messiah. The burden on Lucifer's shoulders became heavier. God almost no longer cared about the matters of heaven. Everything fell on him, the deputy of heaven. He was so busy every day that he barely had time to rest. Under such circumstances, the angels became more familiar with and admired the archangel who was closest to them. "Your Highness, you should have a good rest." Gu Xingyin couldn't help but say to the archangel. Although with Lucifer's ability, it was almost impossible for him to feel tired, as long as he was a living creature, there would always be times when he was mentally exhausted. Lucifer's pale green eyes were as gentle as usual. "I'm fine, Carrie." Gu Shengyin looked at him. You don't have to work so hard. Lucifer's eyes curved, and a trace of gentleness flashed in his eyes. This is God's heaven, and also my most beloved heaven. Chapter 1863. Gu Shengyin looked at Lucifer and suddenly felt a little ashamed. This seraph archangel truly had faith. He used his body and mind to believe in God. His heart was as good as his appearance. Gu Shengyin knew that she could not compare to him. She lowered her eyes. If her guess was true, she did not want to think about it. But what would come would still come. It was getting closer and closer to the creation celebration. The creation celebration that was held every 100,000 years was the grandest event in heaven. On that day, heaven would invite some other races that loved the light, such as the elves, the dragons, and other races' representatives to participate in the creation celebration. This was also the only chance for low-level angels to see God. Since the first creation celebration, every creation celebration was personally organized by Lucifer. The buildings, decorations, banquets, and guests were all arranged by him bit by bit. For Lucifer, heaven was the place where he was born, and it was also the place where he was willing to devote all his energy and effort to. When the creation celebration arrived, the entire heaven already knew that the Son of God, Messiah, was favored. Others had no right to comment on who God favored. But this time, God's preference was too obvious. Many angels complained about the injustice for His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie. Everyone saw the former's contributions to heaven, and the latter was said to have been injured by dark forces and had not recovered her strength until now. However, it was said that God had not seen any angels other than His Highness Messiah for hundreds of years, including the seraphs. Even the guests of the elves asked curiously when they received the invitation. Who was His Highness Messiah, whose reputation had spread to the human world? But the arrival of the creation celebration made all the angels forget the worries in their hearts. They were all looking forward to the arrival of this grand event with joy. Gu Shengyin went out these days. Whether it was the seraphs or low-level ordinary angels, they all had happy smiles on their faces. Contrary to all the angels, her mood was getting lower and lower day by day. She still remembered the words of God in a low voice many years ago. During the next creation celebration was coming soon. The night before the creation ceremony, Gu Shengyin couldn't help but go to the great cathedral. The great cathedral had always been open to her, but Gu Shengyin hadn't set foot here for several hundred years. If God did not summon her, she would not ask to see him. God. She didn't bow, but called out to God in a low voice. Night in heaven was just a title. The great cathedral was already filled with holy light. God's voice had never changed, but Gu Shengyin was still surprised when she heard it. Carrie, you are here? Gu Shengyin ignored God's words and asked, will God personally come to the creation celebration tomorrow? Deity replied, of course. Gu Shengyin suddenly raised her head. She was not surprised to see the figure on the throne withdrawing the holy light. God, can you tell me if the creation celebration tomorrow has anything to do with His Highness Lucifer? She had wondered if it would be her, but the situation over the years told her that she was not enough. Her influence among the angels was not strong enough. Chapter 1864. If she wasn't enough, she naturally needed another existence who was more powerful and perfect than her to take on this responsibility. In the entire heaven, only Lucifer had this ability. God knew that Carrie might have guessed something, but He didn't expect her to have guessed to this extent. He didn't speak. At this time, God's silence was the biggest affirmation. Gu Shengyin widened her eyes. There was a huge difference between guessing and knowing the truth. Gu Shengyin used to think that any world she experienced was just an illusion. She had always only cared about two things: one was the task, and the other was the man who had always been with her. But in this world, for the first time, she felt heartache for the other characters in the task world. Gu Shengyin opened her mouth and finally said, His Highness Lucifer will hate. She didn't say what he would hate. Maybe heaven, maybe God, maybe all of them. God finally said, I just want his unwillingness and hatred. The stronger Lucifer's hatred, the better. Gu Shengyin couldn't help but look carefully at the figure on the throne. He still had that indifferent expression, as if saying such words meant nothing to him and couldn't leave any trace in his eyes. Her heart suddenly felt as if ice had been stabbed into her heart. She was completely awake. This man was the god of creation. Lucifer was just his creation. She put away the expression on her face and solemnly bowed to God. I see. Thank you for your explanation. After saying this, she turned and walked toward the door of the great sage hall. But she was stuck in place. She couldn't take another step forward. Gu Shengyin lowered her eyes. God, do you have any other instructions? God's faint voice sounded behind her. Carrie, I haven't seen you for a long time. You want to see me just to ask about Lucifer? Gu Shengyin understood the meaning in his tone. But she wasn't in the mood to talk about romance. She just said in a cold voice, then, should Carrie thank God that he didn't choose me? There was a long silence behind her. Then God's voice continued, Carrie, you are blaming me. This voice did not come from the high and mighty throne, but from Gu Shengyin's ears. Gu Shengyin closed her eyes and said straightforwardly, yes. She felt something gently leaning on her shoulder. She felt a warm touch through the soft material of her clothes. That was the temperature of God. I'm tired, Carrie, God said in a low voice. Gu Shengyin was stunned for a moment. This was the first time that God had called himself, I, in front of her. She had been in this world for hundreds of thousands of years, but she had never heard God speak in such a tired tone. I can't bear to part with Lucian, but there's no other way. If Lucian hadn't fallen, this world would have collapsed sooner or later. At that time, apart from me, all the living beings in this world will perish. Everything returned to chaos. Even as a god of creation, there were times when he felt powerless. Gu Shengyin closed her eyes. She asked a question. If I was the one chosen by fate, would God make the same choice? There was silence behind her for a long time. After a long time, Gu Shengyin finally heard the answer she wanted. Yes. Chapter 1865. On the day of the creation ceremony, all the angels put on their most gorgeous formal attire. Gu Shengyin was no exception. But she really couldn't feel better. When she arrived at the scene, Lucifer looked at her worriedly. Kalia, you don't look well. Gu Shengyin forced a smile and used the excuse that she hadn't rested well because of an old injury. She looked around. The ceremony was about to begin, and all the angels and foreign guests had arrived. She looked at the beautiful Holy Spirit flowers on both sides of the road, and a group of little angels with wreaths on their heads were happily waving their little wings in the air. Everything was peaceful and beautiful. Lucifer frowned in confusion. Why hasn't Messiah arrived yet? As soon as he finished speaking, a familiar figure appeared on the high and mighty divine throne that was independent of all living beings. God. Lucifer bowed. Following Lucifer's action, all the creatures on his left and right bowed to the throne. Gu Shengyin saw that Messiah appeared with God. Many foreigners who came to participate in the ceremony also looked curiously at Messiah, the Holy Son who had been personally led by God. They had heard of this name when they were in the mortal world, and now they saw that he was indeed very favored. God's indifferent voice sounded throughout heaven, announcing the official start of the creation ceremony. All the angels worshipped, sang hymns, and the angel army showed their power. After a series of routine ceremonies, God stood up. The whole square suddenly became quiet. God said to Messiah, who was standing quietly on the side, Messiah, come to me. Messiah was a little confused, but still walked out. Gu Shengyin lowered her gaze. God summoned Messiah to his side. All the creatures were in an uproar. Messiah was standing far beyond the position where a seraph should be close to God. Lucifer also frowned. He was a seraph with a very strict personality. The laws of heaven were drafted by him, so he naturally couldn't accept such a violation. But such a violation seemed to be allowed by God, so he didn't say anything. God's next words were like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. The Son of God, Messiah, is the inheritor of my gospel. The Messiah is my left and right hand. She should be the most honorable person under me. Everyone looked at Lucifer. What did God's words place Lucifer, who was the deputy king of heaven? Beneath the gods, the archangel was revered. This knowledge was deeply ingrained in the minds of all living beings. What right does Messiah have? Lucifer's face turned pale. He did not avoid it. Instead, he raised his head and looked directly at the god. God, I don't understand. His pale blue eyes were filled with pure confusion. The development of this situation was completely out of his expectations. Messiah herself was dumbfounded. He didn't feel that this was a special honor at all. Almost at the instant the mythological words ended, he felt countless gazes landing on him. It was as if there were thorns on his back. The Messiah wanted to cry in his heart. He didn't want this supreme honor at all, really. He never felt that he was better than His Highness Lucifer. The seraphs also looked at God in shock, and then looked at Lucifer blankly. They didn't seem to understand why God would suddenly say such a thing. Chapter 1866. God didn't give anyone an answer. This wasn't the end. God suddenly turned to look at Lucifer. The Holy Son is honorable. Lucifer, you are the head of the angels. You should lead the angels to kneel and obey the Holy Son. Gu Shengyin could feel that Lucifer, who was standing beside her, stiffened the moment he said this. Before Lucifer could say anything, Samuel stepped forward. This cold and serious angel of death had always worshipped the seraph leader. He couldn't bear to see His Highness Lucifer being humiliated like this. God, how can His Highness kneel to any creature other than you? You said it yourself. His Highness is the star of dawn and the deputy of heaven. He's the first angel below you. Samuel was clearly agitated. Actually, it wasn't just him. After God said this, the angels below were in an uproar. Countless angels were shocked and confused. They couldn't accept this. In the hearts of these angels, His Highness Lucifer was the highest faith in their hearts apart from God. Why would God say something like this? In the face of Samuel's questioning, God coldly said, Samuel, are you questioning me? Samuel wanted to say something, but Lucifer suddenly stood up and said softly to him, Samuel, step back. Samuel looked at His Highness' cold expression and didn't say anything. He retreated to the seraph leader's side. Lucifer walked out step by step, until he stood in the center. He raised his head and looked directly at God, whose face couldn't be seen clearly under the holy light. God, can you give me a reason? His expression was calm, but only Lucifer himself knew how chaotic his heart was at that moment. He had never thought that the God he believed in with all his heart would say such words in such a cold tone. Panic, fear, confusion. These emotions intertwined in his heart, but the only thing everyone could see was the blazing archangel with a straight back. God looked coldly at his seraph leader's pale face. Lucifer, my oracle is the reason. Samuel's face was tense. It seemed that as soon as he realized something was wrong, he would rush out and fight for His Highness. Lucifer suddenly smiled. Holy Light's six-winged blazing angel Lucifer had always been known as the #1 beauty in the heavens. When he smiled like this, even the radiance of the sun, moon, and stars were overshadowed by him. Then, all living beings heard this powerful and beautiful blazing angel speak with a smile on her face. He said, in that case, my God, I refuse. He said he refused God's command. He refused to kneel before the Son Messiah. Heaven's sky, which had always been clear, suddenly darkened. God's voice was cold. Lucifer, you dare to disobey the oracle? Along with this sentence, all of the living beings felt a terrifying pressure that almost suffocated them descend upon them. This was the power of a god. Plop. Plop. The angels and outsiders in the plaza all knelt down, unable to withstand the pressure. The blazing angels couldn't resist this power and chose to submit. Gu Shingyin's strength had not recovered at all. Of course, she could not withstand it. Even the Holy Son, Messiah, was not spared. Only Lucifer stood alone. He endured the terrifying pressure from God and said word by word, "My God, my faith, I follow you devoutly, but I am being treated unfairly. I refuse to accept this." Chapter 1867. I refuse to accept this. This was the answer the seraph leader gave to God. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, he disobeyed God's will. Gu Xingyi knelt heavily on the ground. She felt another strong pressure on her already heavy body. She couldn't hold on any longer, but she only raised her head and looked at Lucifer, who was standing straight in front of her. The pressure they were enduring was just the residual force. Lucifer was the angel who was truly facing God's wrath. Lucifer felt as if his back was about to break. He knew that the gods were forcing him to back down. But he couldn't back down. He couldn't kneel down. He opened his eyes wide and looked at God on the throne, as if he wanted to see through the holy light to see God's expression. He wanted to know if God was as cold as he appeared. In his pale blue eyes, the expectations and dependence he once had for the gods were dying layer by layer. All the angels looked at them. The seraph leader, who had always been noble and dignified, lowered his head. His low voice spread throughout the square, "I would rather die than suffer such humiliation." Countless angels were moved. Under the holy light that no one could see, God's eyes trembled. His cold voice sounded in heaven, "Lucifer, are you really not going to kneel?" Lucifer's expression was already numb. He replied firmly, "I won't kneel." The next moment, something binding the seraph leader's body broke. God's cold voice echoed throughout heaven, "Seraph leader Lucifer, you have abandoned the 7 virtues. You have the original sin of arrogance. You are unworthy of being a seraph leader. You are removed from the position of heaven's deputy ruler. Remove." Lucifer suddenly laughed out loud and interrupted God's words. "This is the heaven that I gave my heart and soul to? Arrogance? God, you don't have to use your mouth." He suddenly turned around and faced all the angels kneeling on the square. The seraph leader's accessories fell to the ground layer by layer, and his long golden hair fell down. Lucifer raised his voice and said, "If heaven doesn't accept me, I won't force it. I, Lucifer, hereby swear that from today onwards, I will abandon the title of Phil. Lucifer is dead. Only Lucifer is left in the world. Your Highness. Your Highness Lucifer. Your Highness, don't." The angels, who were still in a state of confusion, turned pale with fright when they heard this. They could never have imagined that a celebration of the creation of the world would turn out like this. Lucifer raised his eyebrows and smiled. His eyes were full of fierceness, and he no longer had the gentleness of a seraph in the past. "This heaven doesn't want me, so what if I overturn it? Your Highness." There was a gust of wind beside Gu Xingyin. By the time she reacted, Samuel had already walked out. Samuel walked to Lucifer's side and knelt down on one knee. He lowered his head. "Your Highness Lucifer, please allow Samuel to continue following you." Lucifer's eyes flashed with astonishment. He said coldly, "You don't have to do this, Samuel." Samuel shook his head. "Your Highness, you've always been my faith." Lucifer was stunned for a moment. A trace of warmth flashed through his dead eyes. Burial, who was kneeling behind Gu Xingyin, also stood up. His face, which had always been lazy and casual, became serious, which was rare. He imitated Samuel and knelt respectfully in front of Lucifer. "Your Highness Lucifer, please allow Burial to continue following you." The actions of the 2 seraphs seemed to have broken a shackle. A tsunami-like sound suddenly appeared in the entire square. It was the cry of countless angels. "Your Highness Lucifer, please allow us to continue following you." Chapter 1868. Gu Xingyin looked at the scene in front of her in a daze. In her eyes, she saw the angels who were also panicking and at a loss. She saw Messiah standing in front of God at a loss. She saw Lucifer's determined back view, and the high and mighty God whose face could never be seen clearly under the cover of the holy light. She thought, "God, you have succeeded. Your goal, the balance of light and darkness in this world, has been preserved. Lucifer, no, he should be called Lucifer now, led nearly 1/3 of the angels of heaven who followed him in the north of heaven. They rebelled. As seraphs, Gu Shengyin and the others were duty-bound to fight. But even Michael, who loved to fight the most, was unwilling to go to the battlefield. That was His Highness Lucifer. How could they meet His Highness on the battlefield one day? But God wanted more than that. God gave an oracle that Michael would take over the position of the commander of the angel army. Gabriel and Raphael would be the deputy commanders to lead the angel army to suppress the rebel angels. Medellin was in charge of handling the matters of heaven. Messiah went to the battlefield. Carrie, Gu Shengyin, was in the Seraph Cathedral. She said calmly that her old injuries had not healed and she was afraid that she could not go to the battlefield. Gabriel and the others looked at her worriedly, afraid that her actions would anger God. But out of the angel's expectations, God did not punish her. He only asked her to rest well. Gu Shengyin was unwilling to see Lucifer, or rather, she did not dare to face Lucifer. He had been abandoned for the sake of this world. In order to maintain balance and prevent the world from collapsing, the powerful Lucifer, who had a strong appeal among the angels, had to fall. Gu Shengyin could understand God's actions rationally, but emotionally, she could not bear it. She closed herself in the hall and did not go out for a long time. But the system had been dutifully transmitting the news outside to her consciousness. The angel army of heaven was defeated by the rebel army led by Lucifer. Even with Michael around, no seraph was a match for Lucifer. After a few months of stalemate, God used God's descent and descended on the Holy Son Messiah, personally defeating Lucifer. Banished from heaven. The former seraph archangel had fallen into chaos for 9 suns. Finally, when the sun rose on the 10th day, dark tentacles crawled up his pale blue eyes, and his bright golden hair was dyed with a rich black color. The wings of holy light that he had once been the proudest of had also turned pitch black. From then on, there was no longer a brilliant morning star, only the fallen angel Lucifer. Lucifer led his fallen angel army to invade hell. After a series of swift and decisive suppression, the entire infernal realm acknowledged the fallen angel's position. Lucifer became known as the king of hell, the demon king Satan. After the incident with Lucifer, the entire heaven had suffered heavy losses. On the contrary, the overall strength of hell had greatly increased. This was probably the result that God wanted. The atmosphere in heaven was extremely gloomy. Not a single smile could be seen on the faces of the seraphim highnesses, and the angels were also very careful in their actions. Although those ignorant little angels didn't know what was going on, they didn't dare to play loudly when they saw their teacher's gloomy expressions. Gabriel came to find Gu Shengyin. She looked at Gu Shengyin with a worried gaze. "Your Highness Gabriel, you can't do this." Chapter 1869. It had been decades since Lucifer's incident. Princess Carrie had locked herself in the palace and refused to come out, which was very worrying. Gu Shengyin didn't know who she was competing with. She felt that her behavior was quite pretentious. To be honest, from God's point of view, it was understandable for him to make such a choice. Gu Shengyin even felt that it would have been much better if Carrie had been the one destined at that time. Because she knew why God did this and could understand his choice to some extent. But Lucifer didn't know anything. He didn't know that God didn't hate him. In Lucifer's mind, he was the one who was inexplicably abandoned. And he was an angel with such a devout faith. Gu Shengyin didn't even dare to imagine how upset Lucifer must have felt at that time. In the past decades, she had locked herself in this palace and didn't see anyone, including God. She probably just hoped that she could forget some things. Unfortunately, she couldn't. Seeing Gabriel's worried eyes, Gu Shengyin smiled. "I'm fine, Gabriel. I was just recovering." Yes, she had used this excuse to hide for decades. Actually, everyone knew that Carrie's injuries had healed long ago. She was just upset. Seeing her like this, Gabriel heaved a sigh of relief and struck while the iron was hot. "Then I'll set up a small banquet on the moon. Let's get together, okay?" Seeing her expression, Gu Shengyin sighed inwardly. Okay. Gabriel left happily. She was probably really worried that Carrie would be bored after so many years. When Gu Xingyin went to the moon, she happened to run into Messiah, who had also entered the teleportation array. Seeing Gu Xingyin, Messiah was obviously surprised. He said with a smile, "Long time no see, Princess Carrie." Gu Xingyin nodded at him without saying anything. Messiah was very good at reading people's expressions. She saw that Gu Xingyin was not in the mood to chat and stood aside very quietly. When they arrived at Gabriel's palace, Gabriel was shocked to see Gu Xingyin and Messiah together. She was worried that Her Highness Kalia would vent her anger on Her Highness Messiah because of Lucifer. All the blazing angels had come to this small gathering. Gu Xingyin could clearly see that although the blazing angels did not show any problems in terms of etiquette, Messiah could hardly get a word in when they were chatting. No matter what, although they knew that His Highness Lucifer's matter was mainly God's will, the blazing angels still couldn't get close to Messiah. Messiah also knew that he probably would not receive any truly warm reception among this group of seraphs. He smiled bitterly in his heart. In fact, he never understood why God had made such an oracle. He had never intended to replace His Highness Lucifer's position. After attending this small gathering, Gu Xingyin returned to her palace. Someone was waiting for her. Gu Xingyin stopped in her tracks. She looked at the silver-haired god sitting on the chair. She stepped forward with a respectful expression and performed a perfect etiquette. God. The god looked sideways at her and said, "Carrie, after decades, you are finally willing to step out?" Gu Xingyin's expression did not change. Carrie feels that her injuries have recovered a lot. Chapter 1870. God stared at the silver-eyed, silver-haired, and indifferent seraph in front of him, and suddenly sighed. "You still blame me?" Gu Xingyin shook her head. "I don't blame you, God." She said calmly, "The balance of light and darkness is natural. As the God of creation, there is nothing wrong with making such a choice to maintain the balance of the whole world." God suddenly sneered. It was probably the first time that Gu Xingyin had seen an expression other than indifference on God's face. He said in a hoarse voice, "You don't blame me, but you are no longer close to me." He stood up and looked at Gu Xingyin. "In the end, Carrie, you still can't forgive me." Gu Xingyin shook his head again. "Carrie just felt that you were born to be high and mighty, looking down on all living things. I once had the delusion of entering your world, and that was my biggest mistake." God's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Gu Xingyin, stepped forward, and asked, "What do you mean?" Gu Xingyin raised her head and didn't avoid God's gaze. She replied, "I used to rely on you and adore you. I even thought that God would have the same feelings for me. But I was wrong." She didn't look sad at all. Instead, she looked as if she had seen through everything. "You are the God of creation. Everything in the world is your child. You love everyone. In your heart, nothing can compare with the world you created." She suddenly bent over and knelt down to God, making a big salute. "You are still the God that Carrie believes in most sincerely, but Carrie no longer wants to win your heart." God's mind was shocked. Carrie couldn't have said it more straightforwardly. That was, from now on, between him and her, there would only be a clear relationship between a God and a believer. She had given up on him. For some reason, such a sentence suddenly flashed in God's mind. He raised his hand and pulled Gu Xingyin up. "Carrie, do you know what you are talking about?" Gu Xingyin did not try to break free, because she knew that if God did not want to let go, she would never be able to escape. She lowered her eyes and said, "God, Carrie once asked you if you would make the same choice if I were the one chosen by fate." Deity's eyes dimmed. Gu Xingyin said, "Your answer is yes." She raised her head and looked at God seriously. "Carrie doesn't think your choice is wrong. But Carrie felt that if I treated you as my faith, when I was abandoned, it would only mean that my faith had collapsed. But if I treat you as the only one in my life..." Her gaze suddenly turned sharp. "Then I'd rather die in the name of Jade." When she said this, there was something burning in Carrie's eyes that frightened God. He unconsciously let go of Gu Shengyin's hand. Gu Shengyin took a step back and put away the expression on her face. It was as if she wasn't the one who spoke harshly just now. She said blandly, "So, God, in order to prevent us from going to that step, please let go." God's lips trembled. He wanted to say something, but when he saw Carrie's insightful eyes, he just felt that he couldn't say anything. Sensing that God had left, Gu Shengyin breathed a sigh of relief. The system suddenly asked, "Host, are you very sad?" Gu Shengyin smiled bitterly. Probably. She remembered the way God looked at her when he left. He was probably the one who was hurt the most, wasn't he? Chapter 1871. He was forced to give up his most beloved seraph, and she knew his difficulties but couldn't understand him. Because he was God, he was born the strongest, so he was destined to be the one to bear everything. Gu Shengyin silently said sorry in her heart. After this, Gu Shengyin no longer confined herself to the hall, as if everything had returned to the past. Only in heaven, she would occasionally catch a glimpse, and she would never see the seraph with the 6 wings of holy light again. Gu Shengyin once again became a jobless wanderer. In these decades, because of her injury and the fall of the 3 seraphs, the duties in heaven had undergone a large-scale change. The position of the dean of the Angel Academy that originally belonged to her was also taken over by Messiah. Gu Shengyin didn't have any objections to this. She had no interest in the so-called power. If she could choose, it was most comfortable to be an idle person who didn't have to care about anything. What surprised everyone in heaven was that after Lucifer fell, God didn't bring up the once most beloved Messiah. All the angels thought that after His Highness Lucifer fell, His Highness Holy Son Messiah would become the new deputy ruler of heaven. But no. Michael, who was once the adjutant of the seraph, took over Lucifer's position and became the new commander-in-chief of the heavenly army, as well as the deputy ruler of heaven. His prestige among the angels grew higher and higher. But only Michael himself knew that he was still far from His Highness Lucifer. Gu Shengyin lived in this heaven for hundreds of years. She still lived in Crystal Heaven, but never went to the great cathedral. She never saw God again except when God summoned the seraphs for a meeting. The system told her that sometimes, when she was resting, God would quietly come to take a look. But he just stood there and didn't say anything, just watched for a while, and then quietly left. Gu Shengyin just pretended not to know. When the flowers bloomed in the human world, Gu Shengyin went to hell. She wore a thick and airtight cloak, hiding all the light power in her body. Although the demons who came and went felt that this person was strange, what kind of people didn't exist in hell? They were just a little curious. Gu Shengyin slowly walked towards hell. A long time ago, she had been to hell. At that time, hell's architecture was strange, and it was a complete mess. Now, it looked much better. It was rumored that Demon King Lucifer was a clean freak. The first thing he did after stabilizing his position in hell was to reorganize the order of hell. Now that several hundred years had passed, the atmosphere of the entire infernal realm seemed to have improved significantly. The corners of Gu Shengyin's mouth curled up slightly under the cloak. Lucifer was indeed a very powerful person. No matter where he was, he could always show off his unique style. She listened to the conversation of the hell witches beside her. She had heard that ever since His Highness Lucifer had arrived, the one that all the hell witches wanted to devote themselves to the most was always him. She walked forward slowly. Along the way, Gu Shengyin saw many fallen angels. She couldn't see the beauty and holiness from when she was in heaven at all. These fallen angels had pitch-black wings behind their backs. The most terrifying thing was that their faces were more or less corroded and demonized. These were all wounds caused by the corrosion of the dark power when they fell. The angels who were once known as the most beautiful creatures now looked even more frightening than the devils of hell. Chapter 1872. But even so, fallen angels were still one of the most popular races in hell. Because even if they were fallen, most of them still retained some of the elegance and bearing of angels. And these were things that the demons that grew up in hell could not have. Gu Shengyin swept her gaze over them and quietly walked forward. Hell was also divided into 7 levels. The first few levels were where ordinary demons lived. And from the 5th level onwards, it was where the high-level demons and demon kings lived. The core of hell, the 7th level, was the territory of demon king Lucifer. It was said that Lucifer personally supervised the design of hell's 7th level and built a magnificent palace that was not inferior to heaven. The other demon kings went to look for Lucifer with envy, but Lucifer only said, "Design it yourself, live it yourself. What do you have to do with me?" Hell's demon kings, how could they know how to design? After stepping into the 5th level, Gu Shengyin could clearly feel the difference. The streets here were very spacious, and the buildings on both sides were more magnificent. Gu Shengyin looked around. Wine shops, dance halls, flower shops, there were all kinds of shops. It was said that in the entire hell, more than 60% of the industries were under Demon King Mammon's name. He was famous for being greedy. Have you heard that His Highness Mammon is holding a ball in the 6th level of hell today? Really? Those who can go are all high-level demons, right? That's not necessarily true. Lord Mammon misunderstood. The entrance ticket is a magic stone. As long as we can afford it, we can enter. I heard that His Majesty Lucifer will also come today. Gu Shengyin's heart moved. She came this time to see Lucifer and his 2 other former companions. If they were also going to the ball, she would not have to visit them one by one. Really? I have to quickly sell a few pieces of jewelry and try to get in. The few succubi were still muttering. Succubi were low-level demons that were very common in hell. They were characterized by their fair skin, beautiful appearance, and lewd personality. They were very popular demons in hell. An azure object suddenly appeared in front of them. The eyes of the succubi on the left lit up, green magic stone. Such a pure green demon stone was quite valuable. Tell me where Mammon's ball is, and it's yours. An ethereal female voice came from the cloak. The succubus felt her ears go soft. She couldn't help but glance at the cloak. Then, she looked at Gu Shengyin's hand that was reaching out towards the cloak with jealousy. Her hand was as white as jade, and her fingers were slender and perfect. Under the contrast of the green magic stone, she looked even more elegant and beautiful. With just a hand and a voice, this woman was already inferior to who knew how many witches. He wondered what she looked like under that cloak. Just as the succubus was thinking, she suddenly felt a chill all over her body. What are you thinking about? She shuddered and suddenly realized something. She didn't dare to look any longer. She lowered her eyes and said respectfully, "Sir, His Highness Mammon's ball." Gu Shengyin listened to her quietly. She tossed the green demon stone in her hand and walked towards her destination. The witch took the green demon stone in a daze, as if she hadn't recovered from the cold feeling just now. Hiss! She suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. If she remembered correctly, that person just now actually called His Highness Mammon by his name. Chapter 1873. Gu Shengyin quickly found the location of the ball. She didn't go in first. There were many high-level demons guarding the door. Gu Shengyin estimated that with the degree of security, it would be impossible for an ordinary cherub to escape. Gu Shengyin swept her gaze across and found a person who looked like the leader. Seeing someone walking towards him, Barton frowned and shouted, "Go to the door and pay the magic stones. You can enter if the amount is enough." Before he finished speaking, something was thrown at him. Barton reached out to catch it and held his breath. This was a black magic stone with the purest concentration, and it contained a very rich power of darkness. In the infernal realm, other than the demon kings, how many other demons could possess a black magic stone? His attitude instantly changed, and he said with a smile, "My lady, I wonder what doubts you have." Gu Shengyin asked indifferently, "I only have one question. Will the Demon King Highness come to the ball today?" When the high-level demon heard this, he smiled with an understanding expression. Obviously, he thought that Gu Shengyin was a demon who wanted to get close to the Demon King. He lowered his voice and said with a smile, "You found the right person this time. Let me tell you, this time, Lord Mammon has paid a huge price. All the Demon King Highness has agreed to participate. Even His Majesty Lucifer, who has never liked demons, will come." As he spoke, he looked at Gu Shengyin's reaction. Gu Shengyin nodded and said, "That thing is yours. Take me in." Barton was wild with joy and hurriedly led Gu Shengyin into the banquet hall. After Gu Shengyin entered, she sent him away. Obviously, she had come very early, and there were not many people at the ball. Only a few guests were sitting and laughing or chatting. Gu Shengyin found a remote corner with a good view and sat quietly. Slowly, more and more people began to gather. Music began to play on the dance floor, and more demons entered the dance floor. Gu Shengyin couldn't help but want to laugh when she saw how serious these demons were. Everyone knew that the demons were greedy and playful by nature. Balls had always been a foul atmosphere, and it was not unheard of for them to directly perform on the spot when they were aroused. However, because Lucifer was coming today, these demons were all asked to dress properly. Furthermore, Mammon had made it very clear that they were not allowed to do anything that would make His Majesty Lucifer unhappy during the ball. Otherwise, no one would be able to protect him. Even so, there was still some simple flirting. Gu Shengyin even saw several high-level demons reaching their hands under the skirts of the female demons beside them. There were also a few demons who tried to get close to Gu Shengyin, but she coldly rejected them. Gu Shengyin waited patiently for a long time. Finally, it was time for the main event. The entire hall instantly quieted down. All the demons held their breaths as they watched the black-haired demon king slowly walk in from the entrance. Gu Shengyin also opened her eyes wide. He had a beautiful face that was unforgettable, and his black eyes were like ice that could not be melted. His black robe gently floated with each step he took, and the pitch-black wings on his back added a layer of mystery to him. Gu Shengyin finally understood why Lucifer was so popular in the demon realm. His elegant demeanor had not been lost in the slightest because of the fall. Chapter 1874. The rumors were true. All the angels had been corroded by the power of darkness because of the fall. Only Lucifer, the laws seemed to favor him extra, and his appearance did not change at all. However, his appearance did not change, but his temperament was already worlds apart. If it wasn't for the fact that he had the exact same appearance, it would be difficult to recognize that this demon king, who was surrounded by the power of darkness, was actually the glorious blazing angel of heaven. The former blazing angel, at first glance, could only make people think of nobility, gentleness, and light. Lucifer seemed to have a natural charm that made people want to get close to him and be convinced. But the current Satan Lucifer had a temperament that was as cold as 10,000-year-old ice. It was still noble, but it made people revere it and not dare to look at it directly. Behind Lucifer were Samael and Beryl. The two of them had always been loyal followers of Lucifer from heaven to hell. Gu Shengyin noticed that Samael was wearing a pitch-black leather glove on his left hand. This was because when he fell, his hand had been corroded by the power of darkness, leaving only a pile of bones. Beryl's left eye looked pitch-black, and he had completely lost his vision. This was the price they had to pay for falling. Gu Shengyin sighed in her heart. Lucifer's seat had long been prepared by Mammon. It was the best and most eye-catching position in the entire ballroom. But Lucifer was obviously not satisfied. He swept his gaze across the entire dance floor. He was really dissatisfied with the demon's dance. If he hadn't promised Mammon, he definitely wouldn't have come to join in on the so-called fun. Gu Shengyin watched as Lucifer walked straight towards her. Then, he stopped at the seat he was sitting at. Mammon instantly understood what he meant. He looked at Gu Shengyin, who had been sitting there for a long time. Mammon had been paying attention to this strange black-robed man for a long time. Ever since he arrived, he had been sitting here. The fruit in front of him had not been touched, and the fine wine had not been touched. However, there were all kinds of weirdos in hell, and Mammon would only occasionally take a look. As long as he didn't cause trouble, he wouldn't offend anyone who paid him. But since Lucifer had taken a fancy to this place, he walked up and said to Gu Shengyin, "Dear guest, could you please give up your seat?" He didn't think there was anything wrong with what he said. After all, Lucifer was the king of hell. It was natural for any demon to give up their position to him. Unfortunately, Mammon met Gu Shengyin. She didn't even bother with him. In front of Lucifer, this made it very difficult for Mammon to get off the stage. Mammon's face turned angry. Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I'll give you one last chance, alright. Lucifer looked at Gu Shengyin with an unreadable expression and said to Mammon, I'll sit here. This place is so big, one more person, one less person, what's the harm? Mammon's face was ashen, but since Lucifer had already said so, he couldn't say anything. He could only snort coldly at Gu Shengyin and turn to leave. Lucifer sat down opposite Gu Shengyin. Samuel and Beryl, who had been following him, also sat on the other side. Gu Shengyin glanced at Lucifer. The other party didn't seem to have any intention of talking to him. Someone brought over a bright blood-red wine. Gu Shengyin looked at Lucifer's good-looking hand, gently picked up the transparent wine glass, and drank it in one gulp. A beauty, even drinking wine, was a beautiful scene. Lucifer slowly put down the wine glass and looked up at Gu Shengyin. You've been looking at me for a long time. Is there something you need? Chapter 1875. Gu Shengyin didn't say anything. Because she saw very clearly that from the moment Lucifer sat here, at least 2/3 of the people on the dance floor were focused on him. This was originally a good place to talk, but after Lucifer came with his own spotlight effect, it was no longer a good place to talk. Lucifer rarely took the initiative to talk to someone, but he was ignored. He raised his eyebrows and seemed surprised, but he wasn't so ungentlemanly as to vent his anger on the other party. He didn't have such thoughts, but it didn't mean that his followers could tolerate it. For example, the Demon King's #1 fan, Samuel. Samuel's cold personality was well known, and his fanatical worship of Lucifer was also known by the entire region. According to him, you could ignore me and offend me. It wasn't a problem. But you definitely couldn't neglect Lucifer. So Samuel snorted and glanced at Gu Shengyin. It wasn't just a simple glance. Beryl, who was sitting beside Samuel, immediately felt the anger from his companion. He glanced at the stranger wrapped in a cloak and didn't say anything. He also couldn't stand this guy who pretended to be mysterious. Out of all the demon's expectations, Samuel's silent but definitely not weak attack landed on Gu Shengyin, but not even a spark splashed. The body under the black cloak was still sitting upright, as if she didn't notice anything. Samuel glanced at Gu Shengyin in surprise. Even Lucifer looked at her for the second time. He knew Samuel's strength. In the entire hell, he was at the top of the Demon King level. Even if he didn't use his full strength just now, it wasn't easy to take it so easily. Unless the other party had the strength of the same level as Samuel. The same level as Samuel, Lucifer's eyes darkened. Clearly, he thought of something bad. His expression also turned cold. He didn't look at Gu Shengyin anymore. Clearly, he wasn't in the mood to care about her. There were many devilish beings on the dance floor who were paying attention to this corner of the dance floor, but less than 10 of them were able to witness the confrontation that had just taken place. Mammon smiled and let go of the witch in his arms. He raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He said to Bar, who was beside him, "It looks like Samuel suffered a loss this time." Just like Mammon, Baal was a demon king born and raised in hell. He had always disliked the way the fallen angels did not resemble hell at all. This time, he was very happy to see Samuel suffer. Serves him right. I'd been ignoring him for a long time. Lucifer came to the dance floor to participate in the literal meaning of the word participation. From the beginning to the end, he just sat there quietly and slowly drank his wine. He didn't even take a step away. During this period, there was no lack of courageous witches who came forward to recommend themselves, but it was clear that they couldn't even get past Samuel. Samuel's thoughts were simple. What kind of existence was His Majesty Lucifer? These lowly witches actually dared to dream of getting their hands on him? Gu Shengyin sat quietly until she saw Lucifer and the others leave first. She didn't follow them. If she did, it would be too conspicuous. After a long time, Gu Xingyin confirmed that there were no more devils looking over here before she got up and left. From afar, Biyao looked at her back. Do you want to follow and take a look? Chapter 1876. Mammon shook his wine glass. What are we going to do with Lucifer's excitement? He had clearly seen through the black-robed man's purpose. Biyao thought for a moment. It did not seem to have anything to do with him, so he let her be. Gu Xingyin did not stop at all and headed straight for the 7th level of hell. She had left a mark on the system earlier, so she could see clearly that after Lucifer left, he went straight back to the 7th level of hell. There was no obstruction. Gu Xingyin was certain that the other party had already known of her whereabouts. She decided not to conceal herself any longer and let her figure be exposed. Seeing the palace in front of her, Gu Xingyin was shocked. This style, she lowered her eyes. After so many years, Lucifer had never forgotten heaven. There were a few beautiful maids standing at the entrance of the hall. They were not surprised to see her. Esteemed guest, please follow me. They led Gu Xingyin inside. After passing through a few long corridors, they arrived outside a very quiet hall. The maid bowed to Gu Xingyin. Esteemed guest, please enter by yourself. We are not qualified to enter the hall to serve you. Gu Xingyin lifted his leg and walked inside. At first glance, she saw the Demon King sitting high up on the throne. Samuel and Beryl sat on the left and right respectively. They had obviously been waiting for a long time. Lucifer saw her and said, I wonder which old friend has come to hell. When he was still a seraph, he had made many friends. In the heavens and the earth, there was no existence that Lucifer did not know of with the strength that Gu Xingyin had just revealed. It was just that he was not sure who it was. Gu Xingyin sighed and finally said, Your Highness. As soon as she finished speaking, she reached out and lifted the cloak on her head. Samuel and Beryl's expressions suddenly changed. Lucifer's expression did not change when he saw this face, but his eyes darkened for a moment. He did not speak, but Samuel had already regained his composure. He said coldly, Carrie, this is hell. You shouldn't be here. He didn't address Gu Xingyin as Your Highness. Ever since they fell from the sky, the friendship between them had long disappeared. Gu Xingyin smiled. I'm just here to see an old friend. The word old friend stunned Samuel, and Beryl, who had been lazing in his seat, was even more moved. Lucifer stopped smiling and looked at Gu Xingyin. He repeated her words, old friend? It was impossible to tell if he was happy or angry. He said in an indifferent voice, Since when did the Demon King of Hell and the Blazing Angel of Heaven become friends? Gu Xingyin shook her head. It has nothing to do with heaven or hell. Carrie will always remember the friendship of hundreds of thousands of years. The hall fell into silence. After a long time, Lucifer said faintly, Hell doesn't welcome angels from heaven. I won't blame you this time. Carrie, go. Don't come again. Gu Xingyin was not surprised by this. She smiled. Just in time. I'm also here to say goodbye to Your Highness and a few old friends. Lucifer looked at her strangely, as if he did not understand the meaning of her words. Gu Xingyin did not explain. Instead, she said softly, Your Highness, can you give me some time alone? Lucifer turned and looked at her for a long time. Finally, he turned to Samuel and Beryl. You can leave. The two glanced at Gu Xingyin and left obediently. Chapter 1877. Lucifer looked at Gu Xingyin and asked, What do you want to say? Gu Xingyin slowly walked forward, and her eyes suddenly flashed. Lucifer was stunned. Countless scenes appeared in his mind. Gu Xingyin was the first to see a panicked expression on his face. She didn't speak, quietly waiting for Lucifer to calm down. After a long time, Lucifer came back to his senses. He still had a smile on his face, but there was a trace of anger in his words. So, this is the reason why I was abandoned? What Gu Xingyin told him just now was what she knew. She didn't answer Lucifer's question. Lucifer would judge what the truth was himself. Lucifer sneered, what a noble choice. Am I not very noble, sacrificing myself for the sake of all things in the world? He didn't wait for Gu Xingyin's answer, but laughed alone. Perhaps this was the first time Lucifer showed all his resentment in front of an outsider. He turned around and stared at Gu Xingyin. I don't care if you're telling me this under his instructions or not. But I, Lucifer, can tell you clearly that in this life, I will never forgive you. Gu Xingyin wasn't surprised to hear this answer. She said, I told you this just to say goodbye to an old friend. No matter what, Your Highness, as the person involved, you should know these things. Lucifer heard that her tone seemed to be wrong. But his mind was in a mess now, and he couldn't think clearly. Gu Xingyin looked at the time and said to Lucifer, Your Highness, say goodbye to Samuel and Beryl for me. I won't see them alone anymore. She didn't wait for Lucifer's reply. She turned and walked out. Gu Xingyin, who left hell, went straight to heaven. She went to the great cathedral. This was the first time in hundreds of years that she took the initiative to enter the great cathedral. God sat on the throne and waited for her. Gu Xingyin said softly, God, I went to see Lucifer. God replied, I know. His attention had been on Carrie the whole time, and he had seen clearly how she had gone to hell. Gu Xingyin walked forward step by step and suddenly asked, God, can I hug you? God's golden eyes suddenly shone. He looked at Gu Xingyin and said with a trace of expectation, Carrie. Gu Xingyin smiled, I admire you, God. Carrie never changes what she says. She leaned over and gave him a hug while God looked lost. The moment she let go of God's hand, her voice rang softly in God's ear. God, Carrie has never blamed you. You are a great God, and Carrie will always believe in you. God felt that something was wrong. But he didn't notice what was wrong. He watched as Gu Xingyin walked out of the great cathedral. When she returned to her palace, the system asked her, Are you ready? Gu Xingyin nodded, yes. She lay on the bed and allowed her soul to leave this world bit by bit. Her mission in this world had been completed long ago. Just as she had said, she was going to hell to bid farewell to her old friend. Gu Xingyin didn't know how she would face God in the future, so she chose to escape. I'm sorry, my lover, she gently closed her eyes. Chapter 1878. The god in the great sage hall suddenly felt his heart palpitate. The god of creation had never experienced this feeling before. In the next moment, he appeared in Carrie's palace. Seeing the silver-haired figure lying on the bed, God was relieved. However, this feeling of panic didn't subside. He couldn't help but reach out his hand to cover his heart. What happened? At this moment, Carrie, who was lying on the bed, woke up. Her silver-white eyelashes fluttered. She finally looked at God standing by the bed. With just one look, God felt like he was struck by lightning. Uncontrollable panic rose from the bottom of his heart. He watched as Carrie sat up. God, why are you here? Carrie asked in surprise. God didn't say anything. He looked at the figure in front of him quietly. She had a face that he couldn't be more familiar with. Her silver eyes were pure and flawless. At a glance, it was full of faith and infatuation for God. She was perfect. But he knew that this wasn't Carrie. God instantly understood why he felt something was wrong with what Carrie had said to him just now. She was clearly saying goodbye. God's heart was suddenly filled with boundless fury and a storm. She had actually abandoned him and left just like that. His powerful divine sense instantly spread to every corner of the world. He didn't believe that even if he died, even if he turned into ashes, he could still find Carrie. God searched over and over again, but there was nothing. He couldn't find any trace of Carrie's existence in this world. He didn't care about the terrified Carrie. He went straight back to the great sage hall. The book of creation panicked. God, what's wrong? It could sense that God's emotions were very unstable right now. Before the book of creation finished speaking, God suddenly raised his hand. Golden light shone in his palm. In the void in front of him, scenes quickly changed. The Book of Creation was so shocked that it lost its voice. God was using time reversal. God's golden eyes calmly found a point. The next moment, he appeared in a certain scene. It was the moment when Carrie said goodbye to him. He looked over with rapt attention. It wasn't her. Even if he went back in time, he couldn't find her. God suddenly sat down dejectedly. The Book of Creation asked cautiously, God did not answer. Even when he learned that there was an imbalance between light and darkness in the world and he had no way to solve it, he had never felt so powerless. Suddenly, his expression shook. Countless scenes of reincarnation flashed past his golden eyes. The pair of golden eyes flickered several times before finally returning to calmness. The Book of Creation, which had been sitting quietly by the side, suddenly began to tremble. It suddenly felt that its master's aura seemed to have changed. Compared to the previous God, it was even more unfathomable and made people fear and submit to it. God glanced at a certain spot in the void. That glance seemed to have penetrated countless spaces and accurately landed on someone's body. Gu Xingyin, who had just finished her mission and returned to the space, frowned. She didn't know why, but she felt that someone was looking at her. It was probably just an illusion. She shook her head and ignored it. In another world, the silver-haired, golden-eyed man murmured softly. Ah-een. Chapter 1879. When Gu Xingyin woke up again, she found herself in a very strange place. The blue sky and white clouds above her head, the green grass under her feet, and the grass was dotted with countless sporadic flowers. Everything was so beautiful that it was a bit unreal. It was indeed unreal. After receiving the world storyline, Gu Xingyin understood where she was. She was in a game at the moment. This game was the world-famous holographic MMORPG, Fantasy, which focused on the Western fantasy style. The original name was Qinliqing, and she played as a mage in the game. She was actually a healer. Now that holographic games were highly developed, there were even many people who gave up their real-life professions to make money in the game. Dark Fragrance Sleeves was one of them. The ID Dark Fragrance Sleeves was quite famous in the game, Fantasy, and she could be considered an expert. The server Dark Fragrance Sleeves was in, Dragon Roar Valley, was one of the most popular servers in Fantasy, and the guild she was in, Iron Blood Lofty Guild, was also one of the top 10 guilds in the entire server. Don't look at the top 10, it didn't sound that impressive. The entire Dragon Roar Valley server had over 100,000 players online, and a guild that could enter the top 10 was a large guild with thousands of people. Although Dark Fragrance Sleeves wasn't part of the guild's management, she was the #1 mage in the guild. Logically speaking, there were very few people who could be very proficient in the mage class, and there were even fewer girls who were proficient in the mage class. Dark Star Full Sleeves should have been one of the most popular players in the guild. According to the original storyline, she would have stayed in Iron Blood Lofty Guild, and she would have done well. However, she offended someone. It couldn't be said that she offended someone. When they were fighting for a hidden boss in the wild, Dark Fragrance Sleeves and another group of people met. Everyone knew that hidden bosses often dropped good things, so they naturally wouldn't give up. Then, with Hidden Fragrance as the leader, the party directly annihilated the other party. This kind of thing wasn't too much. However, in the other party's team, there was a player who was known as the #1 beauty in the Dragon Roar server. That female mage called Enchanting Beauty hated Dark Fragrance Sleeves because of this. Then, in less than 2 days, Enchanting Beauty left her previous guild and joined Iron Blood Lofty Guild. How much face did the #1 beauty have? It was enough for most of the men in the gang to treat her differently. Not only did Exceptional Beauty want to find trouble with Dark Star Flowing Sleeves, she also wanted to replace her as the #1 mage in Iron Blood Pride. She began to cause trouble for Dark Fragrance Sleeves in all sorts of ways. Dark Fragrance was usually busy doing quests to earn money, so she didn't have time to make friends. At times like this, her disadvantage was revealed. Dark Fragrance was forced out of the guild by Exceptional Enchanting Beauty. This was not enough. Dark Fragrance, who had lost the guild's protection, was even easier to bully. She went to look for medicinal herbs, and Stunning Beauty led a large group of people to follow her. She asked for a party in the World Channel, and Stunning Beauty immediately led a team to open the instance dungeon in front of her. Not only that, she was often forced to PK for no reason. All in all, in the end, Dark Fragrance had no other choice but to abandon her account and start over on a different server. Gu Xingyin stretched his back and said, "System, draw a skill." Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the Demonic Sex Supreme Martial Art, Xianming Divine Skill. Chapter 1880. Gu Xingyin was quite satisfied. Because this skill, the system told her that she couldn't use it in real life, but in the holographic online game, she only needed to click on Learn to learn it. And she could use it freely. What was the Xianming Divine Art? When she was Wu Yili, it was a martial arts secret book. In the martial arts world, it was considered a top secret book. In addition, she didn't have any restrictions in the online game world, so she could use it. In short, that was. Dark Fragrance went from a standard healer who was only suitable to stand behind a swordsman to a true martial arts expert. Thank goodness for the holographic online game. If it was a keyboard game, it wouldn't be so easy. Gu Xingyin secretly glanced at Dark Fragrance's equipment. Oh, they were all level 7 enchantment stones. The equipment was quite good. But, she glanced at the enchantment stones that were basically all health and defense attributes, and unloaded them all without saying anything. Attack, attack, all attack. And agility. Oh right, and critical hit. After quickly replacing all the enchantment stones on her equipment, Gu Xingyin nodded in satisfaction. This was much more pleasing to the eye. She looked at the weapon in her hand, Harris's staff, a golden godly weapon. At the end of a turn, it would automatically absorb 5% of the opponent's attack and 5% of their health. It could be used 3 times per turn. In the entire server, this godly weapon was an extremely coveted existence. There was once a rich person who offered 200,000 federal coins, but Dark Fragrance wasn't willing to sell it. Exceptional Enchantment was jealous for a long time. But even in the original story, when Dark Fragrance abandoned her account and sold it, she didn't get a good deal. Gu Xingyin looked at the time. At this time, Exceptional Enchantment had just joined Iron Blood Heroic Guild and showed signs of discord with Dark Fragrance. In the original story, Dark Fragrance didn't take this seriously at first, but when she did, she found that the entire guild was leaning towards Exceptional Enchantment. She stood in place for a while, then returned to the guild. "Sistering Xiao." A cheerful voice shouted from behind her. Gu Xingyin turned around and saw a very familiar person. Tang Sek's Dumb Pig, a professional assassin. She was a female player who often partnered with Dark Fragrance to open dungeons. The two of them had a pretty good relationship. Gu Xingyin smiled, "Idiot." Dumbo was the abbreviation of the Tang Sek's Dumbo. This was her own request. Gu Xingyin couldn't quite understand why a girl would give herself such a name. After all, it was easy to associate it with the image of the second senior brother in a very popular TV series of the last century. Tang Menju walked over to Gu Xingyin in a daze. His handsome face was filled with indignation. She said, "Sistering Xiao, I just heard Enchanting Beauty and the others bad-mouthing you again." Gu Xingyin looked cold. "She's just a woman who talks nonsense. Don't pay attention to her." "Speak of the devil." An enchanting voice rang out from behind. "Aya, isn't this our great god Dark Fragrance?" Gu Xingyin turned around and looked at the mage who was known as the #1 beauty in Dragon's Cry. In all fairness, Exceptional Enchantment was indeed very good-looking. Willow leaf eyebrows, peach blossom eyes, seductive eyes, red lips. Mages were all dressed in white priest robes. It was supposed to be a very serious outfit, but when worn by this woman, it looked like a brothel. This could be considered a skill. Chapter 1881. Gu Xingyin faintly said, "Oh, so it's Exceptional Enchanting Beauty." The Stunning Beauty frowned. She felt that today's Dark Fragrance flowing sleeves seemed to be different from before. But she couldn't tell what was different. She turned her gaze and her face instantly changed into a gentle expression. "I want to go to a dungeon." I don't know if you're willing to bring me along. Gu Shengyin looked at the guild members walking around and sneered in his heart. It's like this again. In the original storyline, Exceptional Enchanting purposely picked a time when there were many guild members to find Dark Fragrance. She wanted her to be free labor. And before they fell out, Dark Fragrance would always agree to Exceptional Enchanting's request because they were in the same guild and she couldn't refuse in front of so many people. If Gu Shengyin had to say, then this girl was really stupid. It was just the online world. What was there to be afraid of? If she wasn't willing, then she could just refuse. Looking at Exceptional Enchanting's confident expression, Gu Shengyin slowly said, I actually have time. Exceptional Enchanting's face had an expression of, as expected. Then she heard the second half of Gu Shengyin's sentence. But I'd rather go offline and sleep than bring you along. Exceptional Enchanting's face instantly turned ashen. The people who were listening to their conversation all looked at Dark Fragrance strangely. Did Dark Fragrance eat the wrong medicine today? Why was she so angry? The smile on Exceptional Enchanting's face could no longer be maintained. She looked at Gu Shengyin and coldly said, Great God, what do you mean by this? Gu Shengyin tilted her head and looked at her exquisite and beautiful staff. She casually said, What do I mean? Of course it's the literal meaning. I don't like looking at you and I don't want to see you. Is there a problem? A male player couldn't stand it and stood up. Dark Fragrance, we're all in the same guild. You don't have to be so mean. Gu Shengyin looked at him and retorted, Why can't I say who I like and who I don't like? Do I have to kneel down and lick someone's boots with a smile even though I hate them in my heart? She glanced around and sneered, I know that some of you will think that I'm narrow-minded, and some of you will think that I'm jealous. It doesn't matter. No matter what you think, I, Hidden Fragrance Sleeves, just don't like the sight of enchanting beauties. She looked at Stunning Beauty and sneered, Don't pretend to be an innocent white lotus in front of me. Who was the one who brought people to stop me in the Maple Valley instance 2 days ago? Who was the one who robbed me of the alchemist mission yesterday? Even if I don't say it, it doesn't mean I don't know. She slammed the staff in her hand onto the ground, and a burst of golden light spread out. Seductive Beauty, let's not beat around the bush. If you don't like me and want to target me, then just say it. Do you want a PK or what you want? Just say it directly. Don't play some dirty tricks behind my back. I'm disgusted by it. Gu Shengyin was in a good mood after venting her anger. Stunning Beauty looked at her and gnashed her teeth, Dark Star Fragrance Sleeves, don't slander me. Gu Shengyin didn't even want to look at her, slander me? Who doesn't know that I, Hidden Fragrance Sleeves, don't care about anything other than making money? Is money important to you? Do you think that I don't want to frame you when I'm making money? Do you really think you're something? Her words were very crude. It was because of this crudeness that many people believed her words. Chapter 1882. Everyone thought about it and found it reasonable. Dark Fragrance was famous for her love for money. Everyone knew that this girl was always focused on earning money. She had almost never offended anyone because of anything. She didn't have any enmity with Exceptional Alluring Beauty, so why would she wrongly accuse her? Quite a few people looked at Exceptional Alluring Beauty with strange gazes. Gu Shengyin knew that she couldn't win against Exceptional Alluring Beauty in this guild. She knew the relationship between Exceptional Alluring Beauty and the guild leader, Iron Blood. Sure enough, she soon received a private message from Iron Blood. Iron Blood's words weren't too polite, but they weren't too rude either. After all, Dark Fragrance was the #1 mage of unyielding spirit. If their relationship was ruined, it would be a huge loss to Unyielding Spirit. According to Dark Fragrance's original personality, Iron Blood might have acted as a mediator and let the two of them shake hands and make peace. This matter would have passed. However, Gu Shengyin knew that if you fell out with someone like Exceptional Alluring Beauty, then don't think about coexisting peacefully with her. She didn't waste any words and directly sent a message, I don't believe you don't know what Exceptional Alluring Beauty has done. I'll just say this, if there's me, then there's her. If there's her, then there's me. Iron Blood really did know. When he knew that Exceptional Alluring Beauty was targeting Dark Fragrance, he had warned her a few times. However, after Exceptional Alluring Beauty threw a few tantrums, Iron Blood had no choice but to patiently coax her and tell her not to go too far, so he turned a blind eye to it. Gu Shengyin sneered. This was the guild leader? She didn't expect to force Exceptional Alluring Beauty away at all. She just wanted to completely break off relations with Exceptional Alluring Beauty. One day later, Gu Shengyin successfully became a free mage. As an expert in the top 10 of the profession rankings, when the guild behind Dark Fragrance's ID changed to, it attracted the attention of countless people. System, strike first and gain the advantage. Gu Shengyin said indifferently. The system replied, don't worry host. In such a technologically advanced plane, it was really quite convenient for the system to cheat. In less than 10 seconds, an emotional and reasonable explanation was posted on the forum of Fantasy Fiend. The content was very simple. Hidden Fragrance and Exceptional Alluring Beauty had a grudge against each other, from the initial boss fight to her joining the guild, including Exceptional Alluring Beauty's various secret attacks. There were screenshots and chat records, as well as Hidden Fragrance's sudden departure from the guild. No one recognized the ID of the poster, but everyone's focus was not on it. Dark Fragrance and Enchanting Beauty were both well-known figures in this server, especially since both of them were mages and both of them were female. It was even more of a topic of discussion. However, Gu Shengyin didn't care about what happened next. What she wanted to do was to prevent that stunning and enchanting woman from using this opportunity to ruin her reputation. As for the blow, she believed that the bewitching beauty would not let her off so easily. When the time came, it would be better to use force to teach her a lesson. Gu Shengyin had a chest full of depression that she had nowhere to vent. Exceptional Alluring Beauty looked at the post on the forum and then looked at the unfinished crying post on her photon computer. She clenched her teeth and deleted it. She had painstakingly prepared for half an hour and now it was all in vain. She was still preparing to lead a wave of public opinion. Damn that Dark Fragrance, how could she be so fast? Chapter 1883. Exceptional Enchanting was very angry in her heart. She thought for a bit and opened her friend's interface. Exceptional Enchanting's naturally beautiful eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Dark Fragrance, since you don't want to give me face, then don't blame me for not giving you any face. As the number one beauty of Dragon Roar, Exceptional Enchanting had a wide range of friends. Of course, most of them were male players who were willing to be at her beck and call. Exceptional Enchanting quickly found people. With such a team, they could definitely teach Dark Fragrance a lesson. She confidently thought. In the dark forest, a figure wearing a pure white mage robe was bending over to look for something. This mage was Gu Shengyin. Qin Liqing's life could be said to be rough. Her parents divorced when she was 10 years old and each of them had a new family. As a burden, she was sent to her grandmother's house in the countryside to grow up. When she was 18 years old, her grandmother passed away. Her parents felt that they had fulfilled their obligations and completely began to treat this daughter as if she didn't exist. Her university expenses were all earned through scholarships and working part-time. After graduation, she stayed in the city where she went to university. Qin Liqing's biggest wish in life was to be able to buy her own house in this city and give herself a home. She didn't want to find her irresponsible parents. Of course, even if she did, there might not be any results. But with her salary and the holidays here, Qin Liqing helplessly found out that even if she worked hard for 10 years, she could barely afford a bathroom. Until she came into contact with Fantasy Fiend. After finding out that she was one of the rare talented players and that the money she earned in the game was more than 10 times her salary, Qin Liqing decisively gave up on her real-life job and devoted herself to the game. She had already calculated that with her current income, she would be able to pay the down payment after saving for another year. So she played the game even more desperately to earn money, accept all kinds of quests, dungeons, rare materials. Because this kind of game didn't lack rich people. Whenever she got a rare equipment, there would always be all sorts of idiots who would come knocking on her door in minutes. Then, everyone would have a happy transaction. All the players in the Dragon Roar server knew that Dark Fragrance was a player who only cared about money. Fortunately, although Dark Fragrance loved money, she still had her principles. She wasn't someone who would do anything for money. Her reputation in the server wasn't bad. Gu Shengyin had accepted a quest to search for a material called the evening primrose. The evening primrose was a very rare material. To Gu Shengyin, it was actually useless. However, the price was inflated to a sky-high level. Because it was beautiful. Regardless of whether it was forging equipment or fashion items, as long as the moon primrose was infused into a piece of equipment, the entire item would gain an additional layer of fantasy effects. The quality of the equipment would instantly rise by 2 grades, and fashion items would be even more so. Due to the realistic effects and picturesque scenery, there were many female players in fantasy. Since it was a girl's nature to love beauty, the evening primrose was undoubtedly a highly sought-after resource. However, the evening primrose only grew in the Black Devil Forest, and finding it was a test of one's luck. In the past, a player had wandered the Black Devil Forest for 10 whole days without finding a single stalk of moon primrose. From this, one could see just how difficult it was to find. Chapter 1884. If it was any other time, Dark Fragrance Sleeves would not deliberately spend time looking for moon primrose. But who asked her to meet a big tycoon? That young lady who did not eat the hardships of the world was willing to exchange 10,000 crystals for a moon primrose. Crystals were the common currency in the game, and the exchange rate was 1-to-1 with federal dollars. 10,000 crystals, Dark Fragrance Sleeve sometimes had to work hard for 10 days to earn, so of course, she did not hesitate to accept. Thus, Gu Shengyin was now wandering around the Black Devil Forest. The Black Devil Forest was like its name. The entire forest was dark and gloomy, and there was a gloomy atmosphere everywhere. The simulation effect of the game, fantasy, was 100% real, including the 5 senses. However, the 5 senses could be adjusted by 50%, and the same was true for the appearance. Thus, Gu Shengyin understood very well that the beautiful and enchanting face that could be said to be a source of calamity might not be real. She slowly wandered around the Black Devil Forest. From time to time, she would have to dodge some plants that would suddenly attack her. If she didn't manage to dodge them, she would find that she had a 5-second stun buff on her body, or that she would be bitten by something and lose her HP. Gu Shengyin did not change her expression as she swung her staff and killed an owl monster. She thought to herself that it was no wonder that many female players did not dare to come to the Black Devil Forest alone. She slowly moved forward and found that there were 2 players not far in front of her. Gu Shengyin glanced from afar. Yes, the other party hid their ID. She did not pay much attention to it. In such a big Black Devil Forest, it was normal for other players to be around. She did not pay attention to the other party, but the other party noticed her. "Brother, look, that is Dark Fragrance Sleeves." A clear female voice was heard. Looking at her attire, this girl was playing as an archer. This valiant archer with a delicate face and a slender figure had an ID that didn't match her looks at all. It was the big man who picks his feet. The black-clothed man standing beside her seemed to have merged into the darkness. If one did not look carefully, they would not even notice his existence. But if you saw him, you would no longer be able to ignore his existence. That was because his face was very eye-catching. In short, he was handsome. Unlike the delicate and beautiful young men who were popular nowadays, this man's handsomeness was very clean and neat. His facial features were handsome, and his eyes were cold. Just by standing there, he could easily make people think of a proud pine tree. If Gu Shengyin saw this face, she would know who this man was. Because this face was too famous. Dragon Roar's #1 assassin was also the #1 player on the PK leaderboard, Qi Li. A man as mysterious as his profession. He didn't join any guilds, and he always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Regardless of whether it was clearing dungeons or secret dungeons, he would only join his own fixed team. The various large guilds of Dragon Roar had once thrown him an olive branch, but he had rejected all of them. He had many enemies in the sound of Dragon Roar. But now, those enemies had all disappeared from this server. In short, this was a man who could not be messed with. Of course, Gu Shengyin would not provoke him. Qi Li didn't answer. If he didn't pick his feet, the other party wouldn't care. She continued, brother, isn't our team just missing a mage? I quite like dark fragrance sleeves. Now that she has left the guild, why don't I ask her? Chapter 1885. Chili finally spoke, there's no rush. Don't scratch his feet pouted. She knew that her brother had always been proud and arrogant. When he said there was no rush, it meant that he wanted to observe and see if the hidden fragrance sleeve talisman was to his liking. Looking at the white figure in the distance that was extremely conspicuous in the Black Devil Forest, she sighed in her heart. Hidden fragrance sleeve isn't a nameless mage. Don't let her be taken away by someone else before you've finished observing her. Gu Xingyin didn't know that the two players that she didn't even notice were discussing her. She was still looking for the moon primrose very seriously. Perhaps it was because of her heaven-defying luck that she found a moon primrose in just an hour. 10,000 crystal coins per hour. This was a good deal. Gu Xingyin put away her staff. With a flash of light, an exquisite dagger and a jade box appeared in her hand. These two items weren't very valuable in fantasy. It was true that the game was very realistic. Even the materials needed to be picked properly and stored in special jade boxes. Otherwise, the effects of the moon primrose would worsen if it was casually placed in the inventory. After carefully putting the moon primrose into her bag, Gu Xingyin looked around and planned to walk around again. It seemed that her luck wasn't bad. What if she could find another moon primrose? On the other hand, Don't Scratch His Feet, who was following her from afar, exclaimed in envy, hidden fragrance sleeve actually found a moon primrose. As a girl, there was no one who didn't like beautiful things. Chili didn't have much of a reaction to this. For an assassin who paid attention to hiding and keeping a low profile, the moon primrose naturally had the effect of gathering light. It was useless to him. Next, Don't Scratch His Feet looked at hidden fragrance sleeve with a numb expression. In just 2 hours, she had found another 2 moon primrose. She muttered, this dark fragrance flowing sleeves can't be cheating, right? If not, with her character, why would she play games to earn money? She should just buy lottery tickets. Although she said that, she was already counting her wallets. She decided that she would send a private message to hidden fragrance sleeves later. She had to buy a moon primrose. Chili was also staring at Gu Xingyin, but his focus was obviously different from his sister's. Quick reaction and decisive action. A hint of regret flashed in Chili's eyes as he commented, it's a pity that such a person is playing as a mage. Upon hearing his elder brother's comment, Big Brother not picking his feet asked in surprise, what did you say, Big Brother? Was it a pity to be a mage? What do you think is suitable for her to play? Chili replied, assassins, archers, or swordsmen with high agility are all fine. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that this dark fragrance was an offensive player. Why did she have to play a mage? Hearing this, the hobo man looked at Gu Xingyin with great interest. There weren't many people who could receive such praise from his brother. Chili had already made his decision. Let's find hidden fragrance sleeves. Brother, didn't you say that you wanted to observe for a while? Hearing this, big man not picking his feet asked in surprise. Chili curled his lips into a smile. I'm done. Don't Scratch His Feet, all right, whatever her big brother said, she would do. The two of them walked towards Gu Xingyin, but a group of people suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Chapter 1886. Gu Xingyin looked at the group of people in front of him calmly, and the Harris's staff appeared in his right hand in an instant. They didn't come with good intentions. She saw it clearly. The group of people in front of her had hidden their IDs, and they had sealed off her escape route. Don't Scratch Your Feet knew what was going on. Brother, it seems like Dark Fragrance is in trouble. I'll go help her. Her figure was pulled back by Chili. He whispered, let's wait and see. Gu Xingyin looked at the group of people in front of her and said calmly, what are you doing? A swordsman standing in front of her sneered, hidden fragrance sleeves, you've committed too many sins on a daily basis. The few of us were entrusted by others to teach you a good lesson. Gu Xingyin looked around. Her expression didn't change, as if she didn't care about these people at all. "Oh. How are you going to teach me a lesson?" When the person heard this, he was terrified. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. Seeing that you're a pretty girl, we won't go too far. We'll just make you lose a few levels and hand over the staff of Harris." Gu Xingyin couldn't help but laugh. It really wasn't too much. Dragon Roar had been open for almost 2 years. She had joined when the server was just open. Dark Fragrance's account was already over level 100, and she was at the top of the level leaderboard. At her level, losing a level might take a month to get it back. How could they say that? Losing a level could only happen in PvP. In other words, this group of swordsmen was going to PK her, a mage? That was shameless. What was even funnier was that they wanted the staff of Harris. In the 2 years since Dragon Roar had been open, no more than 20 divine artifacts had appeared. Her staff of Harris, in terms of stats, could be ranked in the top 10 of the entire server. It was the number 1 divine artifact for mages. In terms of value, Harris's staff was worth millions of crystal coins. And it was priceless. In order to prevent the artifact from being forcefully dropped, the fantasy developers had already come up with countermeasures. Unless the player took the initiative to give it away, otherwise, even if the player's account was turned into a blank account, the artifact would not be taken away. Even when Hidden Fragrance was short on money, she had never thought of selling Harris's staff, and it was easy to see how much she loved this artifact. And now, these people were asking her to hand over Harris's staff so easily? This was the biggest joke in the world. Hearing her undisguised mocking laughter, the players' faces darkened. "Hidden Fragrance, if you cooperate obediently, we won't go too far. We'll just PK you twice. Hand over Harris's staff, and this matter will be over. If you don't know your place." Gu Xingyin asked, "What if I don't know what's good for me?" That person sneered, "If you don't know what's good for you, we'll start PK like this. Hidden Fragrance sleeves, just wait to be turned white." Gu Xingyin chuckled softly. She raised her head and laughed softly, "You want to PK me?" The dozen or so players on the opposite side thought, could it be that this woman was scared silly? How could she still laugh at this time? Then, they heard a message appear on the virtual panel in front of each of them. "Player, Hidden Fragrance sleeves, has started a forced PK against you." Chapter 1887. The players looked at Gu Xingyin as if they had seen a ghost. In their hearts, they were all thinking, could it be that this Dark Fragrance sleeves had really been scared silly? A magician actually wanted to PK a group of attack-type players? In order to protect the rights of the players, only one player was allowed to PK the same player every day. However, there was no limit to how many players you wanted to PK. The original plan of this group of people was that if Dark Fragrance did not agree to their request, they would forcefully PK her. After a dozen rounds of PK, not only would Dark Fragrance's level drop, she would also lose most of her equipment. However, none of them expected that before they even made a move, Dark Fragrance would actually deliver herself to their doorstep. Gu Xingyin admired their stunned expressions and slowly said, "There's nothing I can do about it. You guys are a group of big men, talking and doing things so slowly. It's really annoying, so I might as well go first." She sighed, "It really makes people feel bored just looking at it." The leader of the opposing group sneered, "Very good, Dark Star Fragrance, I didn't expect you to be so stubborn. Originally, I thought that if you knew what's good for you, we wouldn't go too far. However, it seems like you don't know how to write the words 'know your place.'" Gu Xingyin coldly raised her eyebrows. "Against a group of trash, is there a need to be so serious? You." The man sneered and opened the virtual panel in front of him. Gu Xingyin received a message, "Player, Anonymous, has forcefully PK you." She curled her lips into a satisfied smile. Then, she turned to the others, "I think your team leader still has some guts. He knows to get back at me after being scolded. What about you guys?" The faces of the group of male players became quite ugly. They were openly provoked by a woman. How could they let this go? They could not tolerate this. One after another, Gu Xingyin's optical computer received several messages. Very good, 13 people, 26 rounds of park, not far away, don't scratch his feet, who was looking over, widened his eyes. Is Dark Star Abundant Sleeves crazy? She's a mage, why would she rush to deliver her head to others? That was 26p case. If Dark Fragrance Sleeves lost, she would lose 26 levels. If she really dropped that much, then she really wouldn't be able to stay in the first echelon of Sound of Dragon Roar. Chili stared at the calm figure of the white-clothed mage. A voice in his heart told him that she was not as simple as she looked. He said indifferently, don't jump to conclusions yet. Let's keep watching. Don't scratch her feet looked at her brother in confusion. She didn't understand. Wasn't the result of this competition already decided? What else was there to see? Immediately, she knew what was there to see. Gu Shengyin extended her staff and pointed at the man in the lead. Then, let's start with you. With a wave of her staff, she charged towards the male player. The male player was stunned, clearly not expecting Gu Shengyin's reaction. As a mage, shouldn't she just stand behind a warrior and wave her staff to heal him? Why did she rush up in such a hurry? However, he wasn't a noob. He only stared blankly for a moment before reacting. He sneered, since you're courting death, I'll fulfill your wish. Chapter 1888. As a swordsman, the male player's weapon was a high-level purple weapon. He looked at Gu Shengyin, who was rushing towards him. He moved the long sword in his hand and threw out a series of sword skills unique to swordsmen. The male player was full of confidence. At such a close distance, the other party was a mage with low agility. It was impossible for her to dodge. But the reality was, where was she? The male player only felt the figure in front of him flash, and then the mage in front of him disappeared. Suddenly, the hairs on his body stood up, and he subconsciously looked above his head. The last thing he thought of was the staff that was coming down on his head. Everyone stared blankly as a bright red, critical hit, floated above the male player's head. Then, a minus 11,228 number appeared above his head. There was a deathly silence. The big guy rubbed his eyes hard and almost screamed, brother. I didn't see wrong, right? It's fine if a mage doesn't heal, but she used her staff as a weapon and killed a swordsman with full health in one move? Was this still the phantasm she played? Chili said calmly, you didn't see wrong. To be honest, he was also shocked. Dark Fragrance's move just now looked very simple, but Chili could clearly see that it was not simple at all to execute. First of all, she had to have extremely high agility to be so fast that a swordsman couldn't see her figure clearly. Chili estimated that Dark Fragrance's dexterity wasn't much lower than an assassin like himself. In addition to agility, it was also closely related to her own reflexes. Holographic online games. What was holographic? In the development of online games, the height that a player could reach had a lot to do with their own qualities. Otherwise, no matter how high your abilities were, it would be like guarding a treasure trove and not being able to use them. It would be useless. Just Dark Fragrance's leap just now had extremely high requirements for her body's reaction speed and flexibility. Chili even suspected that Dark Fragrance Flowing Sleeves was a martial artist in real life. Why would such a person choose to be a mage? Chili couldn't understand this point. He continued to look at Dark Fragrance. As for the high damage she dealt just now, one of the reasons was that Dark Fragrance's attack was powerful enough, and the other was that her burst damage was high. Phantasm had a very user-friendly setting. For example, during PK, the closer the attack was to the opponent's vital point, the more likely it was to deal critical damage, and the critical damage would increase infinitely. For example, Hidden Fragrance's attack just now had hit the male player's head. This was one of the most vital parts of the human body, so the male player was instantly KO'd. As for whether this attack was due to luck or Dark Star Flowing Sleeves calculations, he still needed to observe. Gu Shengyin glanced at the silent crowd opposite him and chuckled softly. He picked up the item that the male player had dropped with a flash of golden light. Night Luminescent Pearl? Gu Shengyin was a little disgusted. It wasn't too valuable, but it was better than nothing. She kept it in her backpack. Thank you for the gift, she said lazily. The male player's body flashed with white light, and he stood up again. He didn't look too good. One was because he had lost to a healer because of carelessness. That's right, he didn't feel that he was inferior at all. He felt that he had been careless and thought that Dark Fragrance had gotten lucky.